Okay, so look, we'll get started. So first of all, my name is Elaine Gallagher. I'm a cancer researcher based in UCD, and I'm really delighted that today has occurred. Really, I suppose the point behind today is really profile what we've done in terms of bringing forward the AICRI concept to reality, but also plan for the future. And again, what's critically important for me is that this is a kind of grassroots effort. It's really bringing the community together in terms of cancer research, but also other key stakeholders which are critically important to deliver in terms of cancer research. So the general plan for today is we have an opening address from Micheál Martin. Couldn't be here in person, but he has made a recording, a very nice recording, I suppose, looking at what we've done in terms of AICRI, which we'll play in a minute. And I'm going to give an overview of progress in terms of AICRI after that, and then we go into 3 sessions which we'll introduce in turn. So firstly, what I want to do is thank particularly Dr. Rosemarie Gannon. Rosemarie is the AICRI project manager, who has really been critically important, along with other supports from other institutions, really to, again, bringing forward the AICRI concept and bring it to fruition. I'd also like to thank the members of the AICRI Steering Committee. Again, we have representation from various different academic institutions, both in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but also critical representation from other stakeholders. Again, I'll introduce those later in my presentation. And I think that's really the start. I'm not sure if I've forgotten anything else at this point, but I might make a few other comments. Again, I'd like to thank the speakers for today, but also the chairs, which we'll introduce in turn. Okay, so we're going to start with the presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, while I'm sorry that I'm not able to be with you in person today, I am delighted nonetheless to formally open the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute Vision and Progress Workshop on the margins of the 15th International Symposium on Translational Research in Oncology. I would like to start by offering my thanks to Professor William Gallagher, Professor Mark Lawler, Professor Maeve Lowry, Ciarán Briscoe, and Dr. Rosemarie Gannon for the opportunity to address you all today, and for their work in organising this event. The impact of the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute is testament to the importance and potential of working together on a cross-border basis in practical ways to enhance lives across this island. This is vital work, which the government is leading through our Shared Island initiative, which I established in the Department of the Taoiseach and formally launched in 2020. Our commitment is to work with all communities and political traditions to deliver tangible benefits for the island and build consensus around a shared future underpinned by the Good Friday Agreement. One way we are doing this is through the new North-South Research Programme, which is funded through an allocation of €40 million from our Shared Island Fund. I was delighted to see that the Institute was awarded €4 million by the Higher Education Authority under this funding programme to examine the area of precision cancer medicine. The North-South Research Programme is a significant step in fulfilling our Programme for Government commitment to further support research and innovation across this island. And the work taking place in the early stages of the AICRI project is evidence of how this ambitious funding programme is succeeding in bringing researchers from all corners of the island together to work on pioneering projects showing what can be achieved when we work together. Our approach is not only strengthening existing relationships, but it is fostering exciting new research partnerships. This funding will support AICRI as you continue to strengthen and enhance existing collaborations in the area of cancer research, deepening links between higher education institutions, research and research communities on the island of Ireland. Always working within your guiding ethos of with the patient, around the patient, for the patient. AICRI brings together the combined strengths of scientists and clinicians with those with a lived experience of cancer to create an overarching framework for cancer research. This work will provide a better understanding of cancer, develop more personalised treatment options, and ease suffering and save lives, which is to the ultimate benefit of cancer patients. In time, I am looking forward to hearing of your achievements. The positive impact of such research activity on the care of patients is universally accepted. Our National Cancer Strategy out to 2026 places a strong emphasis on the importance of research in the provision and development of cancer services in Ireland. I note your four main research pillars: cancer prevention, cancer diagnosis, cancer treatment and survivorship, and quality of life, all align closely with our strategy. One of the aims of the strategy is to develop a culture in the cancer care system that values research and is supportive of those who actively engage in it. Cancer research also supports the recruitment, retention and motivation of clinical staff who will drive the development of quality services. Combining the complementary strengths and expertise of researchers across the whole of this island will play an important role in how we collectively address the needs of the growing population of people living with and beyond cancer. I have no doubt that AICRI will make a significant contribution towards developments in cancer research and care and contribute to the future good of patients. Yours is important work. I offer my sincere thanks to all involved in the Institute for your dedication and hard work. Through the combined efforts of those involved in today's conference, AICRI members, health professionals, academics, and not least of all patient stakeholders, the lives of those affected by cancer on this island will be improved. Congratulations on the progress you have made to date, and I look forward to seeing your exciting plans for the future come to fruition. I hope you all enjoy the workshop this morning. Go Mila Mahagwiv Gallagher.
I'd like to thank Taoiseach Micheál Martin for those remarks, but also particularly the Shared Island Unit. It was his vision to establish that unit, and again we particularly benefited from funding recently. We'll cover this later, I think, in the second session, where we talk about three major programs which were funded: Risteárd, which is a PhD post-op training program, also programmed looking at digital health, and a program looking at liquid biopsies, €4 million approximately for each program. And again, that was again under that particular initiative. But also there was other projects which were funded dotted around Ireland in the kind of north-south cancer research space. One final thing I want to do before I get into my presentation, I want to acknowledge Kieran Briscoe. Again, Kieran has been kind of instrumental to me really to deliver the kind of AICRI kind of concept. And this started actually probably about 4 years ago, I think. And I was actually at a conversation at a patient voice and cancer research event where Kieran just sat beside me and we started chatting about what we wanted to do and what he was interested in. And I said, look, I wanted to really try and do something to try really provide an overarching kind of strategy for cancer research across Ireland. And I suppose his expertise in terms of, I suppose, the kind of political side was very helpful to kind of push us forward. So I really like to thank Kieran for that. So I'm going to get into the meat of the matter. And this presentation is really just a flavour, I suppose, of what AICRI is about. I suppose talk about specifically our progress over the last 18 months, and then some element of the future. But we have a specific session 3, which talks about our plans for the future. Okay. So again, we'll come back to the kind of funding bodies later on when we're profiling for these, but again, I'd like to thank the HEA, Irish Research Council, and specifically the North-South Research Programme. So what's AICRI about? So it's probably my most overused slide in history, and many people have seen it, but I think it's an important one which encapsulates the concept behind AICRI. What we're talking about is a cross-border research programme, both North-South, but also importantly East-West, uniting institutions and researchers, and really with the idea of reducing fragmentation, really trying to kind of harness the respective skills that people have. There's particular benefits when we're doing that because we can build critical mass in certain areas. For example, in the areas of precision health or digital health or immuno-oncology, there are specific areas that we want to build critical mass. We're not talking about a bricks and mortar program. We know that we acknowledge that there's very good efforts to coalesce and kind of, I suppose, complement academic institutions which have a natural affiliation with clinical entities and building those structures, particularly around accreditation. I think that's great. But what we're trying to do is build a kind of virtual institute where we link people across those different institutions, particularly at a research level. A lot of, I suppose, what we're talking about is really, I suppose, leveraging the opportunity from data. Again, Mark Lawler and Aedin Culhane will talk about that. And I suppose what we're trying to do is, again, I think, is create this culture where it's attractive for people to actually carry out research. So a lot of it is about ecosystem building, providing an attractive training environment. There's some issues around career development that we'd like to address. So really provide long-term opportunities. We also think there's opportunities to be also world leading, really looking at the intersection between cancer and comorbidities, for example, obesity. So approximately 18 months ago, we assembled a group of steering committee where we had good buy-in from the ground from 10 academic institutions, 2 in Northern Ireland and 8 in Ireland, but also importantly where we had representatives of those institutions acting on behalf of those institutions in terms of their interests. But also importantly, a representation from the National Cancer Control Programme, so the Director, Risteárd, Evelyn Munro from Cancer Trials Ireland, and then various different cancer charities, but also importantly, representation from the patient community. So again, I'd like to just play this video.
On the island of Ireland, 1 in 2 people on average will develop cancer during their lifetime. People's lives change overnight. A cancer diagnosis brings huge worry and anxiety not only to patients, but to their families also. We want to help patients live longer and better lives after their diagnosis. We will connect cancer researchers across the island of Ireland. We will work alongside patients to make sure that their voice is heard. By coming together, we can harness all of our different skills and expertise to better understand cancer, to develop more personalised treatment options, to ease suffering and save lives. This is our vision for the All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute. We will work hard to uncover better diagnostics and treatments for patients. We will learn more about preventing cancer as well as tackling key issues related to living with and beyond it. We will become a global leader in cancer research, and as a result, we will give much needed hope to patients and their families. Please join us in our mission.
So again, I'd like to acknowledge Aidan Gillen for doing the narration there. But again, I suppose that video is our call to arms, right? It's our call, a call to the community for support for the AICRI. And what's amazing, and it's reflected by the audience today, I think we've had huge buy into the concept of people coming together really to combat cancer. And I suppose when we started out on this concept, it was critically important. I suppose a lot of it was coming from the academic community, but we needed to kind of extend beyond that to look at other key stakeholders. We can't look at or address cancer unless we bring all of the relevant stakeholders together. So again, we identified 5 main key stakeholders: both the academic sector, the patient community, the industry sector. We also thought it was very important to actually, I suppose, influence at a policy level, but also get under the bonnet and get some support from a governmental level, and we've done, I think, quite well there. And also importantly, that we can't divorce. It's critically important that we look at the intersection between research and care. So that is critically important to looking at iterative cycle. So again, when we sketched out, we had a concept, and again, traditionally the way cancer research has been funded in Ireland, it's unfortunately it's been stop-start, where people are funded for 3 to 5 year kind of horizons, and often have to reinvent themselves. The idea that it's successor funding is quite challenging. I had the great fortune of leading a programme called Breast Predict, which was a very large-scale programme funded by the Irish Cancer Society over 6 years, €7.5 million going into that programme. But there was no guarantee that there was going to be a successor programme. It was like, great, 6 years, we had a lot of output, trained a lot of people, but then it stopped. And I think that's the challenge. We need to change that dialogue in terms of, when we're trying to address cancer, we need to take a long-term perspective. And so we put out at least a plan for a 10-year programme, quite an ambitious plan in terms of 3 broad areas. It's critically important that we need to see discoveries. Traditionally, because of the economic collapse, there was a lot of emphasis towards more applied research within Ireland. That's still important, but it's also important to feed the discovery. We need to feed discoveries and come up with new ideas to translate. And so it's critically important for that. And we've received some funding to seed at this discovery science area. bottom-up research. Also critically important, we think, is that there's lots of things out there which are coming on stream, nice concepts like, for example, artificial intelligence, but are they being mainstreamed in a clinical context? Often we need demonstrators to actually fast-track those new innovations in a clinical context. For example, with Cancer Trials Ireland and other organisations, we've good activity in terms of the clinical trial space, but commonly it's phase 2 onwards, and we need to resource more phase 1 activity. Again, in the area of biobanking, great biobank in Northern Ireland where the biobanking activity is integrated, and we have good biobanks in the Republic of Ireland, but the plurality of it is the challenge. We have biobanks, good biobanks, but the challenge is the integration of those biobanks. And then the other key theme that we want to address was that we have a burgeoning kind of ecosystem in terms of innovation, new spin-outs in the oncology space, strong interactions with pharma or large-scale diagnostics companies, but we want to nourish these and grow these forward. So critically, we think that AICRI can have an impact across a number of different areas, thematic areas in health, both in cancer prevention, improved diagnostics, particularly focus on improving treatments, the area of precision medicine, and also importantly in the area of survivorship. Again, I mentioned this concept of an ecosystem for cancer research, an innovation ecosystem. On the bottom left are just some example companies, small companies which kind of spun out, a lot of them from academic institutions, not all, where they're in oncology diagnostics or therapeutics. And the challenge is to grow these and amplify these and actually make sure that we actually can deliver new diagnostics and therapies from ideas that are generated on island. And then obviously we have these big partnerships which exist at different levels, but we want to actually grow these going forward. So again, I want to pay tribute to the AICRI Steering Committee, which have really helped kind of define this concept from the bottom up. And again, these are just the current representatives of that committee. And again, each of those are representing their institution as a voice and guiding our kind of strategy going forward. So again, we put the letter in, and I think Risteárd asked me for this, I need a top 10 list of benefits for AICRI. So this is our top 10 benefits for AICRI. And we think there's a kind of multi-layered benefits. For cancer researchers, we're already seeing this, even by the concept of AICRI, the concept of an all-island approach is starting to disseminate in terms of new partnerships. So we can build collaborations and cross-border relationships. We can also build things of scale. And again, we have some very nice examples of 2 hubs of excellence which have been awarded under the HEA North-South programme, one led by Lorraine in liquid biopsies and the other with Aedin Culhane in digital health that they're going to talk about specifically. Bringing people together from different disciplines is critically important. Also, for academic institutions which have a stated interest in cancer, it's critically important also that we kind of connect amongst those different institutions, particularly if we want to leverage funding from EU. We think there's going to be benefits, I think, from this kind of fast-tracking approach and improved access to research in terms of in the areas of health and education. We can foster new partnerships, but also critically important to really accelerate this transition from discovery to implementation. That's critically important. Again, if you talk to any cancer patient, and I have some in my in immediate family, it's the slowness of translation is frustrating, and access to innovation is frustrating. So we want to fast track this, make it more efficient, and we need to come together to do that. Also, I think at a political level, I think it's important because, again, cancer, I think, is a neutral topic for us to be able to come together and work together, both north-south. And also it's critically important that we have effective stakeholder engagement. So what we're going to do is delve into this in a bit more detail in the later sessions, but we put out a very short call of about 3 weeks where we asked ideas from the community. We got about 150 submissions, I think, of both targeted and platform projects, we call them, just ideas. And what we did is we tried to distill those ideas into 4 initial areas that we said, okay, can we bring people together in a workshop and thrash it out in a bit more kind of detail about, what's the current state of the art, what are we good at, what are we not so good at, and what can we do to come together and bring it forward. So we chose 4 areas. The first was Living With and Beyond Cancer. Professor Juliette Hussey from Trinity College was kind of lead on that, and she's going to give an overview. Immuno-oncology and the microbiome, Professor Jarushka and Naidoo and colleagues from Cork were leading that one. Digital health and cancer, Mark Lawler and Aedin Culhane, and functional cancer genomics and precision oncology, Adrian Bracken and Walter Colch. So Mark, I think, is going to cover the digital health programme workshop, and Adrian's going to cover the functional cancer genomics and precision oncology. We also had a couple of workshops, I'll cover in a minute, with cancer charities, because again we have an important cancer charity sector within Ireland, and again we're seeing some evidence of kind of partnership across different charities. So for example, Walter Colch is in the audience. I'm not sure what the feedback is here, apologies, but any ideas what the feedback is, because it's going to probably annoy people if it keeps going. Do you want to? Maybe it's I'm too close to it or something. So Walter leads a programme called Precision Oncology Ireland, some of you may have heard of. It's a large-scale SFI strategic partnership programme, and this is half funded by SFI and half funded by the charity and the industry sector. And importantly, it's 6 cancer charities coming together. So it was one of the first times where multiple charities came together. And we had a very successful midterm review for this particular programme. We'd hope to maybe grow that into a second phase programme. Also, we had a very nice workshop with cancer patients, which I'll cover in a minute. And also, as I mentioned, we got some significant funding under various different programmes. I think about a third of the funding under the North-South programme were allocated to North-South cancer research activities. And so I forgot to mention Professor John Crown and colleagues. You know, we're organising this event today as an adjunct to the Translational Oncology Symposium. This is a fantastic symposium. It's been going for about 15 years. John Crown and Dennis Lehman were the original kind of concept leaders behind this programme. And so it's a free meeting, but you get a chance to meet the world leaders in cancer research and care. So we're very fortunate to have this this morning. So I won't go into detail in the interest of time, but just to flick through the slides, the kind of topics which were covered. Again, this was an online event that Juliette and colleagues had in Living With and Beyond Cancer. And these are the topics which are covered, looking at exercise, nutrition, communication and psychosocial needs, and implementation. Again, a very topical area of immuno-oncology. We have some great immuno researchers in Ireland, but we probably haven't taken full advantage of that expertise in terms of maximally bringing it forward in terms of immuno-oncology. We're obviously aware of the great work that's taken place with the APC Centre in terms of microbiome. Can we integrate those activities? Again, there's a big area of digital health and how do we advance that aspect, and functional cancer genomics and precision oncology. I mentioned we have this Precision Oncology Ireland programme, but one area that we'd like to kind of push and progress forward is functional cancer genomics, this idea of, again, this feeding the discovery pipeline, and Adrian will cover that. I'd also like to acknowledge that my good colleague who's in the front row, Professor Amanda McCann, and Elaine Quinn, who's going to talk about it a bit later. Again, this is a kind of grassroots effort. The Patient Voice in Cancer Research started about 5 years ago, and the idea was to have this dialogue between cancer researchers and patients and their family members. And they've held multiple different events. But we had this very nice hybrid event between AICRI and the Patient Voice in Cancer Research as an adjunct to the IACR meeting, and Elaine will cover the topics there. And again, we had again strong representation of. I won't steal Elaine's thunder. You can kind of go through it. So again, this is just a snapshot of, again, a lot of what we had to do over the last. This is kind of, I think we just had our first real in-person meeting like about a month ago, which was our steering committee meeting, and this is really our kind of first big meeting in person. Most of this happened online. All of the activities we're talking about, apart from a couple of exceptions. And so we had a very nice online workshop with 7 cancer charities, 3 with a base in Northern Ireland and 4 in Ireland. And again, covering, I suppose, what were the focus of these cancer charities? Can we encourage collaboration between the charities? Can we look at, for example, Breakthrough now had a recent call for an esophageal cancer programme, both north-south. And again, can we mainstream this concept now going forward? Rosemarie's going to cover this, and again, this was our first grant award, a modest level of funding, but a very significant vote of confidence for AICRI. This was under the Irish Research Council Shared Island Fund, and this provided funding for today and for various different workshops, and also our new website. Rosemarie will cover that. So I mentioned this already, and we have a specific session, session 2, which will delve into that in more detail, which gives you, I suppose, a bit more detail on the 3 main programs which have been funded. I'll cover AICRI Start, which is again a proof of concept idea of PhD and postdoc training all Ireland. It's only 10 PhD students, 10 postdocs. You could multiply that by 20 easily, right? But it's just a starter. We're hoping to build this program going forward. And then Lorraine is going to cover the Liquid Biopsy Consortium, and Aedin, the Digital Health Program. But again, there's also importantly several Strand 1 programs. I think Olga, who's in the audience, got one, and a few others in the area of kind of cross-border programs. Again, driven a lot by Kieran and others, but I suppose one of the things we've tried to do is kind of get people, put our idea in front of, I suppose, different political representatives, different groups, to get support for our concept. And we've done that quite successfully, again, mainly driven by Kieran's work. But one of our kind of highlights was we had a 2.5-hour session at the Joint Committee for Implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. Again, a recorded session where we had some representatives of the core working group talking about AICRI. We got huge buy-in from the political representatives, and people want to support what we were doing. There is a historical, I think Mark might talk about the kind of historical narrative that I don't have time to go into it. There is a kind of context behind where AICRI has come from a historical point of view, mainly driven by the Good Friday Agreement. So we presented to that group. So this is essentially an update from the chair of that group, Fergus O'Dowd, to Micheál Martin just recently.
Email in my capacity as chairman last night from Professor William Gallagher. He presented to us here in October on an all-Ireland Cancer Research Institute strategy, and they've made significant progress on that as a result of the context that they've made. So you're absolutely right. There's huge progress being made on the health front as well.
So we also had 2 just more recent events where we had the opportunity to present the AICRI concept at a specific meeting with the actually in his residence. He wasn't there, so we just kind of used his pad. It was very nice, facilitated by the UCD Foundation, and we're going to have a follow-up meeting with him in person, because again I think it's critically important that we kind of connect between all Ireland but also east-west with mainland UK as well. And again, it's important also that we expand out our horizons also to the US. And again, we had a very productive meeting with the new US ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, and we're hoping to do some follow-up events in the US. So just to finish off, and again, I'd like to pay tribute again to the AICRI Steering Committee, which some of them are represented in the photograph here, not all of them. And we had a meeting earlier on this month, our first kind of like in-person meeting, really to talk about like what we've done, but also plan for the future. And we're going to cover that a bit later. What are our plans for the future, and hopefully get feedback from yourselves about those plans. So just to finish off, I'd like to thank again the funders, particularly the Irish Research Council, the HEA, the North-South Research Programme, and also kind of the background bodies which have helped in terms of the Health Research Board, SFI. So in the interest of time, I don't think we have had a slot for questions. Let me see, what time are we on there, Steve?
Just after 10.
Okay, so I'm already bad in terms of timing. So I'll withhold questions if that's okay, right? And we'll go straight into session 1. So I'd like to introduce our 2 chairs who are here, and again I'd like to really acknowledge the support of Professor Risteárd, who's the Director of the National Cancer Control Programme. He's been a key advocate for the AICRI concept from the start, and that's really helpful for us because we see this kind of continuum between research and care, and it's critically important. And also Debbie Keatley, who's you're involved in the Northern Ireland Cancer Research Consumer Forum. Yeah, that's great. And Debbie was also involved in one of the workshops, Living With and Beyond Cancer workshop, and also has a specific interest in the area of digital health. So we've got 5 short talks, and we have a Q&A session.
Okay. I'm Debbie Keatley, and I'm really, really pleased to be asked to be here today. It's fantastic, and I'm in awe of what's already been done. Just that run through from Liam's astonishing. There's so much ambition here, and it's fantastic to see. It really is. I'm from the Northern Ireland Cancer Research Consumer Forum, and I'm also involved in some other work in Northern Ireland in the Cancer Registry, and I work across the UK as well, because cancer doesn't really care about borders, so the work happens everywhere, and I think it's really important that we keep that in mind when we're looking at what's happening here. So what we want to do first of all in this session is look at some of the work that's happened in the past. The first up is Professor Juliette Hussey. She's a professor in physiotherapy in the School of Medicine in Trinity, and received her Masters from King's in London and her PhD from Trinity. She's been in Trinity since 1992 and served as head of the discipline of physio for 11 years, or physiotherapy, I should say the full name. She was elected to fellowship in 2011. Her research focuses on evaluating exercise interventions aimed at increasing physical performance in patients undergoing treatment for cancer, and she's supervised 30 postgrad students to completion and has published over 75 papers, which is fairly impressive. And this is one of the things, living with and beyond cancer is something that's really hard to articulate for somebody right at the start of the journey when they're getting a diagnosis. There's so much changes at that point, and you do not know. You really do not know how life is going to change. So this piece of work is never complete. It's always in progress, but it's hugely important that we understand and explain to everybody, not just patients, but to their families and to the people who matter to them, how to make the next bit of life good. So anyway, Juliette.
Thanks, Debbie. Lovely to see you again. Thanks very much. I had the pleasure and privilege of running the first workshop, and one of the key things when Liam amassed quite a large committee together was we were really excited to have this, and we said we'll just hold off in 21 until COVID is gone, and we'll have it in person. And we kept delaying and delaying because we really felt we needed the opportunity of actually coming together. Anyway, unfortunately COVID got in the way, and it was held. It had to be held online. But it was very successful, and I think a lot of the work started well before the workshop, when we actually came together as a committee to identify what were the key survivorship issues that we wanted to address. And I think, as you know, as Debbie was saying, they're infinite in terms of the number of what we could focus on. But we were really focused, I suppose, on the research that was happening on the island. So really it was a really great workshop where there was over 100 participants, and I think there was about 16 different presentations in different areas. And we sort of grouped it into sessions: exercise and nutrition, communication and psychosocial needs, and then how we implement systems change and implement services that we evaluate into practice and that are scalable, transferable, and brought right to where the person needs it. So I suppose in terms of just going through the state of the art in terms of some of the areas, in exercise and nutrition, there are a number of small-scale, often single-centre studies with limited collaboration and limited personnel and funding. I think that's improved dramatically even in the last year because of coming together. But our numbers are small, and to get, particularly where we're doing efficacy studies, to get studies that are adequately powered, it's really difficult doing them in a single centre, unless they go on for so long. And certainly in my area, if they go on for so long and you're comparing them to a control area, that changes. So it's to really get scale, we need to be doing multi-centre studies. So there is developing intra-institutional collaboration, but there's huge potential. In the area of communication and psychosocial needs, there's a lot, in terms of programs and in terms of bringing programs to the patient, I think there's a lot is happening, and particularly with the huge amount of work the NCCP has been doing in psycho-oncology. But I think in that area, the whole discussion of actually, again, how you bring it to the patient, how you bring it, the huge amount of implement what is being found to be efficacy into the clinical area has many challenges. And many of the programs are very much embedded in specific tumour needs rather than in the broader in the broader sense where actually survivorship services actually happen in a broader area than in tumour specific. And then in the third area, the implementation, as Debbie was saying, it is a journey, and there's both unmet but also unknown needs at this stage across all cancer types. And I think what we became, particularly concerned about is the number of underserved and underrepresented populations, and particularly at the ends of, the very young and the very old. And I think just to remind you in this, the slide on the left looks at the growth in terms of age groups of cancer survivorships, that where we are now and where we expect to be in 2040. And you can see where the huge increase is in those over 65, between 65 over and the over 75 age group. So groups where there's going to be other comorbidities and where we really have to invest in research that's going to be scalable. 80% of people who survive cancer have some physical and functional need that needs to be addressed. So our research needs to look really quickly at efficacy and then really look very quickly at implementation. And there's a growing amount of work on the adolescent and young adult, and Cheryl Alkin presented at that. So where do we want to go? I think we want to look at multimodal interventions, because in real life that's what happens. It's not just exercise or nutrition or psycho-oncology, they're multimodal, and we need to look at these multidisciplinary interventions and evaluate them. We also need to get much better on personalised prescription of what is needed. On the exercise side, we know exercise works. We don't know how much exercise for an individual patient, unless we measure it well, unless we link that to their other therapeutics and see the impact that other therapeutics can have, particularly on cardiac function. So there's a lot of work to do in that area. Multi-centred, adequately powered studies, and then we need to use the opportunity to look at more mechanistic work. If we, in terms of exercise and nutrition, we very much measure things at a systems approach. Is there an improvement in fitness? And we need to work with clinical scientists to identify, well, what's happening mechanistically that can explain those changes. And I think that's something we're not harnessing enough. We're not biobanking enough material at those points in time. We've really powerful studies, intervention studies, where we're measuring people at a systems level, maybe twice, 3 times during a 12-week intervention. We have the opportunity to look at what's happening at a mechanistic level. And then we need to do more looking at the people at the younger and the older, the groups that were really probably more underserved. So how do we get to the next level? Building capacity is huge, and particularly in clinical sites. And I think one example is the investment the Irish Cancer Society have made recently in terms of investing in clinicians to do research. Gráinne Shiel and Naomi Algo from St James's, the two in the middle of the photograph, recent awardees, who have 18-month projects really to work on embedding research into clinical practice, becoming the next generation of leaders, asking and answering the important research questions. And I think it's this type of model we really need to develop more and more. So collaboration, as I said, with clinical scientists, and then links with community care to see how if we do efficacy studies, how do we put them at scale and implement them into community practice. The use of virtual and digital technologies, both for communication, but also for delivering services. We had to do a lot of that during COVID, my group and other groups, and actually it worked very well in a number of cases, and that's an area that we could explore more. And then, as I say, multi-centred studies that are adequately powered. And including, we tend to be quite exclusive in terms of some of the studies we do to answer the question, and we exclude those of younger and older and with comorbidities, and we need to look at studies that are probably much more inclusive across the span. So key points: collaboration, communication of the value of this cancer survivorship research, and I think it's opportunities like this that are really bringing that to the fore. I think we see a lot more funding from the HRB. There's two studies from people I work, shortlisted for DIFAs. We have a DIFA. There is much more appreciation from the wider research bodies. And then consideration of stratified approaches to enable sustainable and flexible models of care. The numbers are going to be enormous. The number of people we're going to need to address in terms of survivorship needs. So we need to have a lot of work in implementation science, and then research into clinical innovations. So I hope I stuck to 5 minutes.
just to briefly say, Risteárd is my name. I'm the National Director of the NCCP for the last couple of years, and I'd like to thank Liam and Mark for inviting me here today to chair one of the sessions here. Just to say, I mean, the Cancer Strategy, and John Kennedy is here, John chaired that, the Cancer Strategy 2017-2026 has put as one of its recommendations a significant stress on research and asking the NCCP to bring together the research communities and to bring some cohesion and collaboration to it. And that was a daunting task actually for the NCCP. And I always think of Henry Kissinger's phrase, who do you call when you want to call Europe? And kind of Ireland is a small country relatively, punches above its weight in a lot of areas, but who do you want to call when you want to call Irish research? And so when Liam Gallagher and Mark came to me and said, actually we're thinking of bringing together an All-Ireland Cancer Research Institute, bringing all the collaborators together from clinical sites and the universities, here was my answer. So I have been a great supporter of AICRI, and I'd like to thank Mark and Lee for doing all the work on this and bringing it together. And I think it's more than collaboration, because collaboration is hugely important in a small country like this, but there's also the synergies that arise from that collaboration and the focused use of, which in a lot of times is taxpayers' money and where it goes to, and also giving producing research in this country that will stand in the international arena, because we have done focused research and have worked together. So thanks everyone who's been part of this. So our next talk is from Professor Jarushka Naidoo, and she is Professor of Medical Oncology at the RCSI and an Adjunct Professor of Oncology at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, and she's also a medical oncologist in Beaumont Hospital. She has served in multiple leadership roles, including Chair of Clinical Trials Ireland of the Irish Lung Cancer Alliance and Chair of the Immunotherapy Subcommittee of the NRG Oncology. She's also a recipient of multiple awards, including a Young Investigator Award given by the Lung Cancer Foundation of America. So Jarushka is going to speak to us on immuno-oncology and the microbiome. Thanks, Jarushka.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Risteárd. So I'm just going to give a whistle-stop tour really of one of the key areas of growth, both in cancer care and in clinical research, and very much I'm representing a diverse group of both clinical, translational and basic scientific partners across the island of Ireland and their collaborators here. So as many of you know, immunotherapy has truly come of age over the last several hundred years, actually starting from some very early discoveries by surgeons in New York. But more recently, I think when we talk about immunotherapy, we talk about certain classes of agents, and really the key group of treatments would be immune checkpoint inhibitors, which first came to the fore in 2010 based on a seminal discovery by a Nobel Prize winner, Jim Allison, that has subsequently led to the use of immunotherapy for very common cancers, including lung cancer, rarer cancers such as melanoma. Of course, the first ever approval for immunotherapy in a tumor-agnostic indication for MSI-high tumors, and now the current age is to use immunotherapy combinations. So really, we've seen that immuno-oncology agents have truly transformed the landscape of cancer therapies. And as soon as you put slides like these together, they're immediately out of date. But here, we see that there are approvals for immuno-oncology agents in over 30 different cancer indications, spanning monotherapy, combination approvals, as well as novel immuno-oncology approaches such as CAR T-cell therapy, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, oncolytic virotherapy, and many others. So to touch on the other area of focus of this workshop, there is an interaction between immuno-oncology agents and the microbiome. So what is the microbiome? The microbiome, the definition of this is the constitution of microbes that exist in a biological niche. And we see that the most populous area of the microbiome is, of course, the gut. And the gut microbiome has been associated with normal health, as well as with certain aberrant conditions such as inflammation inflammatory bowel disease, and many other areas. And really how this interfaces with immuno-oncology is we understand that immuno-oncology is different to other cancer therapies in that it's using a host feature to alter the tumor microenvironment. So we see that the gut microbiome is an example of such a host feature that may augment responses and even change the toxicity profile of immune checkpoint inhibitors for cancer. And we see here one of the very seminal papers by Jen Wargo and the MD Anderson group demonstrating that patients who have a more populous gut microbiome is associated with greater incidence of response to immunotherapy. And separately, the group at Memorial Sloan Kettering showing that even the quality of your gut microbiome matters, and that the presence of certain species in the gut microbiome, particularly Bacteroides species, may protect against the development of immune-related colitis, which is a potentially fatal toxicity of immunotherapy. So very important, not only extending life, but also impacting the quality of life of our patients. One of the challenges with microbiome research is that, of course, this has only been done in certain areas of the world, and the microbiome may be dependent geographically on different factors, diets, various different elements. And we see here really that disentangling some of the complexities of gut microbiome and how this impacts response and toxicity to immunotherapy is different in jurisdictions. So another area, of course, of microbiome research is the intratumoral microbiome. So if we look at the tumor itself, it's not just tumor cells that we see in the tumor microenvironment, but there are also microbes at the level of the tumor microenvironment, and this may also impact both response and toxicity to immunotherapy. So taking all this together, while the microbiome is a very interesting area of research, there are several limitations. Major microbes appear to be different across very similarly conducted studies. There is often limited annotation of clinical outcomes for these patients. Data sets really only in the US, France, and Japan, and limited mechanistic studies to help us understand and link how the gut microbiome actually changes the immunology at the level of each patient. So bringing that back to our workshop, of course, Ireland has several researchers that are focused in the area of immuno-oncology, in the microbiome, and then, of course, bringing those together in terms of moving forward in the field. How do we action that? So myself and two very prolific microbiome researchers at the University College of Cork, Professor Paul O'Toole and Subrata Ghosh, who is the new chair of APC Microbiome in Cork, taking over from Fergus Shanahan, coordinated this workshop. The first part of the workshop, we focused on immuno-oncology, trying to bring together our basic scientific researchers, as well as some of our clinical PIs who are doing immunotherapy clinical trials, to identify what the areas and strengths of immuno-oncology research are across the island of Ireland. And this included some presentations from basic researchers such as Aedin and Elizabeth Ryan, NK cell research being done in Trinity by Claire Gardner and her group, clinical researchers, myself, Austin Duffy and Donald Brennan, who are doing seminal work trying to create investigator-initiated clinical trials, either creating platforms or trials of our own, as well as translational researchers based in Trinity, such as Joanne Lysett. From a microbiome perspective, we featured some key microbiome researchers, Ken Nally and Andrew MacDonald, as well as intratumoral microbiome research with Jochen Pren happening in RCSI. Very importantly, I think we need to focus on action items. While we can bring together these people, what are the next steps and how do we make that happen? And I think while people are important, resources and infrastructure is equally important. So we had very important presentations from Seamus Brown, who is an industry partnership leader at the RCSI, who has been behind several partnerships between clinical and translational researchers and biotech to try to fund how we can bring these discoveries to our patients. Claire Keatley from the Irish Cancer Society, who talked to us about key funding strategies in immuno-oncology researchers and how bringing the voice of the patient to the important clinical trials and clinical researchers is seminal in this area. And then Seamus Cotter, a very important person to me, my patient advocacy partner from the Lung Group in Cancer Trials Ireland, who is a survivor from an immunotherapy clinical trial that was run through Cancer Trials Ireland, and really bringing home some of these discoveries to patients. So this is sort of a smattering of some of the results that we featured in our talks. So from a tumor immunology perspective, talk a little bit about some of the basic science research that has been conducted in colorectal cancer and several other areas, focusing on biomarkers of response to immunotherapy, and then critical infrastructure such as new phase 1 units that may help bring immuno-oncology studies to patients. Some work on the microbiome, areas of interest, for example, gut microbiome specifically, working at the interface between the gut microbiome and immunology and intratumoral microbiome. And then lastly, partnerships. How have some of these partnerships looked in the past, and how may we be able to effect this in the area of immuno-oncology and the microbiome? So where do we want to go? What are some of the key outputs that we think bringing some of those researchers together could result in? The first, of course, is to create national biorepositories of immunotherapy-treated patients. Of course, like anything, when the answer is cancer, tissue is the issue. So we need to bring tissue and samples together. We need to critically link these with well-annotated clinical databases. And this is where linking our partners in the laboratory and our clinical partners is critical. These discoveries need to then translate into investigator-initiated clinical trials. We need to create research environments and infrastructure in order to understand what discoveries may actually action into a trial for patients. So what are some of the inputs that are needed in order to affect these outputs? We need mechanisms for integration between clinicians and scientists, regular meetings, regular co-located structures, identification of relevant funding streams, and investment in core infrastructure and partnerships. So key action items from our workshop will be, firstly, to identify or create a team science funding model. Examples of these would be an SFI spoke center, industry partnerships, or charity-supported partnerships such as Breast Predict. To identify internationally competitive team science-focused projects, we need to focus and identify what the specific aims and projects are that will be competitive at both a national and international level. And in order to do this, we should leverage cross-border strengths and aim to ask novel questions that we may be uniquely positioned to answer. And lastly, to remove barriers to success, to create standard operating procedures for biobanking so that each time we try to open these studies, we're not reinventing the wheel, and streamline methods for setting up clinical trials. This has been brought up before, trying to remove some of the potentially redundant areas that have been created or systems in order to open clinical trials that have actually created barriers rather than helping us with progress. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody who participated in this workshop, and happy to hand over to the next speaker.
Okay, and next I'd like to introduce Professor Mark Lawler, who's frequently found on the Enterprise train between Belfast and Dublin. He's Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor of Digital Health, Chair in Translational Cancer Genomics at Queen's. He's the Associate Director of Health Data Research Wales Northern Ireland, Scientific Director of Data Can, previous member of the Scientific Advisory Board. Mark has so many tags after his name, we could spend all morning. I have to say, he is, if there's anything happens in the digital space, Mark knows about it in about 2 minutes flat. So he's going to come now and talk a bit more about that. He's tireless. I have no idea how he keeps going, but I'm very grateful he does.
Thanks very much indeed, Debbie. Isn't it great to be in a room all together, interacting with each other? It just is super. The other brilliant thing is in a room all together talking about all-island cancer research. Isn't that brilliant? Yeah. It was super to hear the Taoiseach say one thing in the whole talk that he gave was really important. He actually said research was important to clinical care. And that's something that we've been pushing for the last probably 10 years, Liam and myself and others in this room. And it's really clear now that patients who are treated in research active hospitals have better outcomes than those who have not. And that's really important. And Risteárd has really championed the importance of research in clinical care. And it's really important that we get that message out and actually push for that as we go forward. I'm going to talk on the Digital Health and Cancer workshop that we held in Limerick in Dell Technologies. Really, it was a hybrid event. We had about 120 registered, so a mixture of people in the room and then people online. And one of the things we really looked at was looking at the digital health and cancer landscape And there is a lot going on in Ireland, and on the island of Ireland, and that was really important. So that was, if you like, that sort of scoping exercise that formed part of what we did, looking at cancer registries, which are critically important, but also digital health transformation. Mark and Curley talked about that, systems biology, Walter College, and cancer genomics. The session on data sharing was particularly important, and Aedin is going to talk about this in more detail in Federated eHealth, because it forms the basis of the programme that Lee mentioned that we were funded on under the HEA North-South Shared Island Fund, and Adrian will talk about that after the break. But one of the things I want to focus on is the critical importance of patients. And I'm just going to show on the next slide just an example of why patients are so important. So as Debbie said, I'm Scientific Director of DataCan, which is the UK's health data research hub for cancer. And patients are involved in everything that we do. So from the very start, from when we wrote the grant, patients were involved in helping us to write the grant, in reading different reviews of it, in reviewing projects, in recruiting some of our staff, involved in all our discussions, including our commercials discussions. They're represented on our steering group, our management group, each of our project groups. They also have the power of veto. And I'm just giving you two statements that our patient advocates have said. One by Jackie Gath, who I work closely with and who's brilliant, particularly on cancer inequalities. And she said patients want their data to be used to improve care. In fact, they're often surprised that it's not used already. And that's exactly, I can see Tom nodding there. We need to change that, okay? That is not acceptable in 2021. Look at what we were able to do when we actually reduced the restrictions in relation to using data in the context of COVID, particularly in the UK, but also here in Ireland. We changed the game in relation to being able to respond rapidly to what was a significant challenge and come up with tangible solutions that were data-driven. And the second is, and this Pete Wheatstone said this, as patients, who's the chair of our PPIE group, as patients we are not only empowered, but we feel empowered. And that actually makes me proud, because that means that what we're doing is right. We're actually getting it right. The patients actually feel that empowerment and they can go on and lead programs. We then looked at the variety of different projects right across the island of Ireland in relation to omic data, in relation to image data. We've got a lot of really talented individuals, and one of the things that Liam and myself really sort of focused on in relation to this whole initiative is bringing the best minds on the island of Ireland together to answer one of human health's greatest challenges. That's what we're trying to do here. And really, one of the important parts of that is the talent that we have on this small island. And then we also, and Liam mentioned this in his talk, we actually held the hybrid event in Dell Technologies in Limerick, and we looked at some of the opportunities then in terms of that cross-fertilisation of research and innovation. Because we need to look at all aspects, public sector and private sector. And we had some very interesting conversations in relation to integrated healthcare, in relation to digital twins, in relation to living labs. As I said, Aedin will talk about just some of the initiative that we've been funded on that will touch on not all of these, but some of these discussions after the break. And just to end off, Liam mentioned something that we've really pushed this whole all-island agenda for quite a period of time, right back from 1999 actually, because it originally spun out the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm delighted to say that myself and Evelyn Keatley, who is somewhere here, we've actually been asked next week to speak to the ASCO International Affairs Committee meeting on what we've done in Ireland in relation to cancer research and cancer care on the island of Ireland. So that, if you like, shows that the world is actually looking at us, seeing what we're doing and recognising that we're doing something really special here on the island of Ireland. And I'll leave you with that, okay? Thank you.
Many thanks, Mark, for that. Our next speaker is Professor Adrian Bracken, and Adrian is a Professor of Medical Molecular Genetics in Trinity. He completed his PhD in 2000 before undertaking postdoctoral fellowships at the European Institute of Oncology in Milan and the Centre of Epigenetics in Copenhagen. His research focuses on the field of epigenetics and its relevance to stem cells and to cancer. His lab has made several seminal discoveries in the fields of cancer epigenetics. In 2021, he was elected an EMBO member for his outstanding achievement in life sciences. So, Adrian. floor is yours.
Okay, so before telling you about the workshop, I have to introduce functional genomics and what that is. And so the dates on this particular slide are very important. So note that the scientific paper is 2012. And scientists spoke with medical oncologists, and the medical oncologists told them about a problem. And the problem was that this BRAF inhibitor, so a drug that should be able to treat this particular cancer, colon cancer, was not working. So the oncogene BRAF was in the cancer, they had a drug to inhibit its function, but it wasn't working. So they spoke to the scientists and they did functional genomics. The numbers are also important on this slide. So you'll see that there's 518 genes tested. We have about 20,000 genes. So they tested a cohort of just, 1/40 of our genome approximately. And they figured out that one other gene, if you hit it or knocked it out or inhibited its function, it would help to treat this particular type of cancer. So that's functional genomics. In other words, they checked 518 genes. One other gene turns out to be the gene that we should be hitting, as well as the BRAF inhibitor. So this translated then, look at the date again, 7 years later, they did a trial, and you can see at the bottom of that slide, they have the BRAF inhibitor, also the other gene has been hit, EGFR. And so the combination therapy is working, and it causes clinical benefit in this cohort of patients. So that's one of the early examples, just 10 years ago, of functional genomics. And the line between functional genomics and precision oncology that line is happening all the time now in the last 10 years. And the workshop that we organized a few months ago just discussed this. So, of course, things move on. You can see on this particular slide here that instead of doing the particular methods that we're doing in that paper, now we're able to look at all 20,000 genes. We're able to apply this technology, linking it with next-generation sequencing. We can do this just as effectively. In other words, we can apply this to many other clinical situations where drugs should be working but are not working. And we can find out combination therapies, and we can feed that information back to the oncologist. So it's a narrative and a dialogue between the oncologist and the scientist. And this is happening all over the world. So what's the vision, and where do we want to go? Essentially, as you can see in the middle of this slide, it involves technologies. I mentioned next generation sequencing. There's also single cell omics and very high level bioinformatics are core technologies here. But right out on the left, there's fundamental science research, and Liam mentioned that. And so not only can the science tackle, for example, finding new ways to treat cancers, but it can also tackle what's called the non-coding genome. So what is in your non-coding genome, that's the 98% of your genome that is not making genes. That's the part of your genome that can often predispose you to disease such as cancers. And now basic scientists are able to tackle that. And the question here is, as you can see on the bottom of the slide, it's really trying to force this dialogue between the discovery and the clinical research. And that's mediated by these technologies. And these technologies are just exploding really in the last 5 to 10 years. And so ultimately what you're hoping for is genomics-informed treatment of patients. Okay, so that's the end goal. So we organized this workshop. It was very well attended, and we asked these two questions that are in the bullet points there. And I should say there were really, as in all the workshops, there was really a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, and a lot of talent, both from the scientists, but also from the doctors. And I'd echo one of the points that Juliette made, is that really one of the good things that's happened in the last few years is that doctors, MDs, are getting time bought off to actually do research, and that allows them, of course, to engage with the scientists. So a lot of energy, a lot of discussion, and we came up with some bullet points here just to say, how do we want to get to the next level? So the talent is there, both in terms of scientists and doctors. The will is there. So what practical things can we actually do to make this happen? So one of the first things you need, obviously, are people to do the research, and that's PhD students and postdocs. And that was one of the first steps, I guess, with Risteárd, is that's beginning to happen now. We're getting very talented PhD students in to work in these areas. Another thing is, this is one of my core points. I really value the interaction between scientists and doctors, oncologists. And you saw that in action earlier on in my presentation. So, and we actually in my lab have 2 doctors, 2 MDs working in the lab, and they interact with scientists. So any way you can think to get MDs, oncologists working together with scientists, I see that as a good thing. And so perhaps one thing that came out of the workshop was perhaps formalizing that, co-supervision by the non-clinical scientist and the clinical investigator, and good things can come out of that. In other words, forging many examples of this translation from functional genomics to precision oncology. Another thing is that we obviously have to have tools to do this, and there are many scientists on this island, both north and south, that have their own sort of isolated set of tools and systems to do this. But what we really felt collectively is that we need to coordinate and synergize and help each other. And then obviously we need investment in infrastructure. These are rapidly evolving technologies. We're only in the last few years moving into single cell omics, and what goes in parallel with that, of course, is that you need bioinformatics and data systems to be able to manage all these huge data sets and sort of to support the basic scientists to do that. So thank you very much.
Elaine's the Senior Manager in the Conway Institute, which is a biomedical research centre in University College Dublin. She has an undergraduate degree in applied sciences, master's degree in science communication, and more than 18 years experience in communications, public engagement and graduate education. Elaine manages the Patient Voice in Cancer Research, which is an initiative to build connections between cancer patients and researchers, and that's led by Professor Amanda McCann. So please come up. And I'm going to say afterwards, will you stay up, Elaine, and would the other speakers please come up and we'll start the questions.
Right, thank you, Debbie. Super, good morning everybody. So I just wanted to start just by giving you a little bit of background to the Patient Voice in Cancer Research, and it's always at times like this when Mark Lawler is in the room that I always have, I suppose, order envy, because I think in 2016 when we thought first about really involving patients and the patient voice in cancer research, we knew we were about 10 years behind our colleagues in Northern Ireland and the UK, and I think we've been very grateful on our journey to the likes of the Northern Ireland Consumer Forum and colleagues in Involve UK for all of the experience and the valuable help that they've given us in setting up this. So as Debbie said, the initiative is actually led by Professor Amanda McCann from UCD, and though it's led by UCD, it's really, from the very start, we wanted to make sure that cancer researchers and patients from across Ireland were included in this initiative. So I suppose since we started in 2016, the outputs from the initiative being about 21 events, both in person and then with COVID online, and as we come out of COVID into hybrid, involving more than 1,300 people. And I suppose the exciting part about it is, the input of the lived experience into the likes of reports for the National Cancer Registry of Ireland and for the National Biobanking Working Group. And one of the previous speakers was talking about biobanking and trying to streamline that process. And one of the early workshops we had was around having streamlined patient consent and information leaflets, and the input of the patient voice to that was so important. We've had a number of feedback sessions to over about 17 research groups, not just from UCD, but from UL, from the University of Galway, from DCU. And I suppose as we moved from 2016, we felt it was really important to build the capacity for PPI and our researchers. So with the help of some funding from both ISSF and from the Irish Cancer Society, we managed to do some train-the-trainer workshops for that. So we've done introduction to PPI for PhD students and for postdoctoral researchers, as well as bringing those patients into those training workshops and working with them in actually training the researchers. And we were very delighted last year when we culminated the sort of charted that 5-year journey we've done so far in a publication. So we were delighted to partner with AICRI in this particular workshop back in March, and as Liam said earlier on, this was side by side with the conference, the IACRI conference that happened down in Cork on the 30th of March. So it was a hybrid event, and Rosemarie was in the room on the day. We had about 25 people in the room, we had about 45 people online. I was doing the online piece, and we were delighted to have the experience of 5 patient advocates. Ivan McGinn there was online, but the rest were actually in the room. And the whole idea was to try and give an overview of AICRI and for the patient voice, to look at what the strategy would be for the coming years, but to explore how patients would actually get involved in this initiative, to openly discuss the challenges for patients to getting involved, and to also identify what the impact of their involvement actually is. So we were, in terms of the themes that came out of that, what was lovely to see is that it was quite obvious that the patient voice is so powerful. And that lived experience is extremely important to cancer research. What came through strongly as well is that cancer diagnosis doesn't actually define the person. A patient comes with their lived experience, but they also come with a whole load of professional experience as well. So they have a huge amount to offer to any cancer researcher. So the research community also has a really important role to play in terms of helping cancer patients. We heard from Ivan and our colleagues in Northern Ireland that patients should really be involved at every level, from policy right down through. But also, and I came through from our facilitator, Stephen, the wonderful Stephen T, that carers and family members really need support through this, and their voice is really, really important. We discussed the barriers to involvement, including the jargon, and again, Mark Lawler's fine box, I think, is probably being filled up quite regularly with jargon. But there was also, a lot of honesty in the lack of confidence sometimes that patients feel in actually coming into a room with a lot of cancer researchers. We know from our university office, it seems like ivory towers. So it's to get out of those towers and to break down those barriers is really, really important. And then also the difficulty sometimes in actually implementing PPI. And we heard from Claire Keatley in the Irish Cancer Society that sometimes, even though cancer researchers have put in the application to get funding for a patient, actually implementing that through university systems can be quite difficult. So those are the things we really need to address. So I suppose the key outcomes for the workshop and what AICRI are going to be looking at really are building that shared future, building on those resources, building on the best practice and the experiences. And we have such an opportunity here with our colleagues in Northern Ireland and the UK and the experience that they've had ahead of us. That we should look at an all-Ireland cancer strategy, particularly relevant to those cancer patients on the borders. And that involving patients in the design of cancer strategies is really important to have a cancer patient there as a co-chair of each of those strands of those policy development stages. They want to encourage all patients to share their lived experience by getting involved at local, national and European levels, and acknowledge the contribution and make sure that our patients are reimbursed for the time and the expertise that they put in. My colleague Amanda is always saying, literally, we're talking about consultants and consultants' time, and that is absolutely invaluable. So we need to be reimbursing patients for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elaine. And we'll take some questions from the audience.
I think I can speak for my own university, and perhaps it's applicable to other universities, that the emphasis is on teaching, which is obviously we all want our children to have great education. So it absolutely should be a priority. But if that's your priority, then perhaps research is your second priority or third priority. And I worked in cancer institutes in Denmark and Italy, and they were loosely affiliated with the university system, and so they weren't bound by those restrictions. And their priority was, one, getting the best cancer researchers, scientists into the institution, and then the second priority was backing them with resources and everything they needed to be world class. And I don't know, I've been in Ireland as a PI, I suppose, 13 years now, and honestly frustrated by that, not having a cancer research institution that really is focused on bringing the best. And there's some really outstanding cancer researchers who would like to work in Ireland, and they're equally frustrated by that. So I think, from my perspective, that's the biggest challenge.
Thanks, Adrian. Mark, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think one of the
I think one of the things we still need to get across in our consciousness is the importance of research and the fact that people who are treated in research-active hospitals have better outcomes than those who don't. I think we need to get that message across to government, we need to get that message across to the public, because I think if people start to realise that cancer research is not an added extra but is a necessity, then that will then drive. So we need more Risteárds, and talking to the Department of Health, talking to the politicians to say, this is not an added extra, this is a critical part of how we deliver cancer, 21st century cancer care. The other thing is we need to significantly up our budget. And if you look at the comparison between the budget for cancer research in Ireland with most of our European countries, unfortunately, we don't fare very well. I mean, the island of Ireland in relation to that. But I think it's that realisation that research has moved from being a sort of a spectator sport to being right in the centre of cancer care. I think if we can get that message across, and we all have an ability to do that in our different situations, that really can be helpful.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else on the panel? Jarushka?
Yeah, I think there are two major impediments that I see. The first, Dr. Kennedy, you've said many times. I think as a clinical researcher, one of the very obvious things that we could do that is an impediment is that there feels like there are multiple levels of regulation that are redundant and don't necessarily help us to move clinical trials forward. We will be irrelevant if it takes a year to open a clinical trial. The question is already open and answered. So I think I would look to leaders in the field to try to rationalize some of those levels of bureaucracy, and as we add a layer, we need to take a layer away in order for that to actually make progress. The second thing, which Adrian already alluded to, is the single unit value of a research system is to create a team science approach. So you need to create a system by which you have a scientific partner, and it is an ecosystem between a clinician and a scientist. And I don't think we should wait for that to be sanctified by an institution or a hospital. I think when we're hired, we should just do it ourselves. And if you build it, they will come. So I think that that's certainly what I'm trying to do, is to create a system by which there is active integration between the scientists and the clinicians. And I think once people see it, then hopefully they will start to replicate it.
Thanks, Jarushka.
Thank you.
Juliette?
Yeah, I just couldn't agree more, and I think that needs to be across all the health sciences. And clearly we see this with the allied health practitioners, people who really advanced clinical skills at a clinical specialist level, who then do PhDs, but don't have then the opportunity to bring that forward, to become, the demands of clinical service means it's difficult to lead on the ground, to deliver on that ground. So I think protected, recognised clinical time and career pathways that really acknowledge the importance of it.
Thanks, Juliette. I think if I was focusing on John's question, it was particularly what AICRI could do. So I don't know, Liam, do you want to add anything to that and the impediments that might be there?
I suppose in a sense we're kind of trying to do that already, John, in the sense that we're trying to define what is the patchwork, I guess, to address, I suppose, again, probably you had a big part to play in it. There's an absence of an overarching framework for cancer research. So we're trying to define that framework. It's all well good to define it, but then is to resource that framework. So there's a couple of things we need. I do think we need a big program to bring people together, because that's always, it's like a gravitational force that brings people together. So I do think we need a big program, like an all-island, north, south, east, west centre. I think is critically important. In the absence of a specific call for that, what we've been doing is assembling the components. So we've some of the components together, but there's a bigger picture. And I think we're fortunate. It was great work that people got those programs, but we're fortunate because if you didn't get that, then you kind of lose the buy-in as well. So you have to kind of keep that buy-in. So you need to take a long-term perspective. That's the challenge. You're being involved in Irish Cancer Society and other funders. A lot of funders, unfortunately, they have to take a short-term perspective because they don't know, things change. But we have to address cancer. We have to actually take a bigger picture aspect. I do think what's critically important for me is the virtual nature of the institute, because ultimately science works research works across geographical boundaries anyway. I collaborate with many researchers internationally, but it's sharing that expertise, having the culture and environment, the people, the training of the PhD students and the postdocs, career development. If you look in Israel, they've, I think it was Israel or Switzerland, no, Switzerland just recently put out a call for postdocs, over 100,000 a year, right? Postdocs, starting with postdoc salary in Ireland is 31 or 32 or something like that. Like, so, you know, some countries are actually making that difference now. There's some changes with the PhD kind of new scheme that's coming on stream. The can't remember the name of the scheme. Nearly double the salary for a stipend for PhD students. So you have to make it attractive. Particularly if, for example, you want to advance, say, something like AI, like, you know, anyone in data science, they're not going to go into medical research. Why would they? They're not going to be paid anywhere near it. Anybody I have working in that space, they're gone, right? So you have to make it attractive, not just pay, but also the environment. You have to be respected, not just, oh yeah, you're doing that specific job because, you know, you're supposed to be doing it. You're part of a team. You're a valued part of the team. So it's a culture. Most of it is culture. People will want to work in the place because of the environment.
Well, what I would say is that it goes at two levels. Having MDs in the lab of a scientist is wonderful because they're literally with their colleagues in lab meetings and so on, talking about the medical relevance of a particular disease, in this case cancer. And the scientists are, you know, then telling them about methods and scientific methods. So that works wonderfully well on a sort of a small scale in a lab sort of environment. But more nationally, I mean, my personal experience is that I'm always looking for oncologists to collaborate with, but I'm frustrated by their lack of time to do so. It's not that they're not willing or don't want to or not able. They're very bright and motivated and energetic and extremely hardworking people, but the situation that they're in means that effectively they really can't probably do the job for as well as they'd like to, and really have sort of a partnership. Because you saw the line between, in my case, it was functional genomics to precision oncology. I'm sure that line also applies in all of the other workshops, you know, as a result. And you know, so just having the, I suppose, PI level doctors, the PI level scientists, really having, I'm not advocating for equal amount of time to do the research, but 20, 30, 40% would be absolutely wonderful. And I can see the few instances that has happened. The research is much better for it.
Mark, and then we'll close the session.
Just very quickly on the Northern Ireland National Cancer Institute initiative, yes, very much so. It's been reignited, if you like, in the last year, signing of a new memorandum of understanding and also now different subgroups set up. And I think the interaction between AICRI and the Northern Ireland National Cancer Institute will be very significant. And just to leave you on a positive note, my friend and mentor, Paddy Johnson, used to say, don't think small in these things, dream no little dreams, but stirring up the hearts of men and women. So we need to be ambitious, and we need to really deliver for the cancer patients on this island.
Thanks, Mark. And on that positive note, just to thank our speakers and just to thank my co-chair, Debbie, this morning, and we'll go for coffee now. Thanks very much.
We have a great solo chair, Siobhan Gaynor, and Siobhan is a researcher turned patient who's living with metastatic breast cancer, is also involved in Cancer Trials Ireland in terms of from the patient input point of view. And then I think maybe Siobhan, you can talk about, I suppose, an interesting idea of patients leading research.
So thanks everyone, thanks Liam. It's rather strange to re-engage with the community having worked amongst you for many years. Unfortunately 3 years ago I got the diagnosis, knew the statistics, etc., but now living with metastatic breast cancer, and I thought that what I could usefully do is inform researchers from the research perspective what it's like to be a patient. Believe me, it's a very different space. So what I'm trying to do is to set up one of the first patient-led research projects via Cancer Trials Ireland in order to understand stage 4 cancer a little better. It's one of the forgotten cancers. So that's my mission for the next few years, and I will be touching some of you and emailing some of you to help either guilt trip you in or otherwise. So hoping to work more with you in the future. So it gives me great pleasure to chair this second session for AICRI, and fully welcome all the developments in the space. It's great to see the energy and the enthusiasm in the room, and in particular the all-island approach. So one of the first things I recognised very quickly as a patient was the lack of joint-up thinking. It's very obvious when you're on the ground, in terms of the institutions, collaborations, etc. But the very basic stuff, for example, I spent 30 years working in clinical research where I get to see patients' notes on a regular basis. Getting my own notes has been somewhat problematic. In fact, much harder than getting other people's notes. So that's what I hope to bring, is that perspective, the reality on the ground, which has its voice, as we see within AICRI. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Rosemarie, who has been introduced already by Liam, so if you don't mind, we'll jump straight back in.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Siobhan. Okay, y'all, it's a pleasure to be here today, and in my role as the AICRI project manager, I'm also been very much working, it's been development really the last couple of years, and I guess we're all driven by different things. I suppose one of my main missions with the AICRI is, while I'm not the clinician or the scientist, I think the project does a lot of social good, and we can potentially be of great benefit to a lot of cancer patients and their families and wider society. So I think that's what really drives me forward, and it's very much a team effort, and I work very closely, obviously, with Liam and Kieran and Mark and all the different people. And I think that's why it's great to see such a good turnout today, and such great energy, I think, in the room, and a great enthusiasm for our work, so just to say that. So moving on then to just talking a little bit about our first funding success. I suppose with any project you're looking at, how do we move it forward? And obviously, funding is very important. And so we applied for our first new foundation scheme. It was called back in May 2021. And this was an award. It was funded by, again, the Shared Island Fund, which we had from the Department of the Taoiseach, but it was administered by the Irish Research Council. So we applied and we were successful, and it was an 11-month project, which is ending up now at the end of October, and €20,000 was the overall budget. But again, very much key funding. And just to talk a little bit, the project for this is called, so we're looking at exploring the economic, political, societal and health benefits of an all-island cancer research institute, strengthening collaboration in cancer research throughout the island of Ireland. So that's very much what we've been doing for the past number of months, in particular when we've organised some of the workshops in that. And so just very briefly, what were the main aims of our work? Were to confirm the need for the All-Island Cancer Research Institutes. I think that's very clear from today and from our other activities during the year. Engage with cancer patients and advocacy groups, engage with industry, explore how we might contribute to economic development, look at other funding possibilities through the Peace Plus programme, and look at our governance and operating models, and strengthening and enhancing existing collaboration through networking. So a lot of our work has very much looked at networking, and today, for example, we're here at our showcase event. So I'd like to acknowledge the funding from the Irish Research Council for this particular event. We also had the patient stakeholder event, which was very successful. It was already mentioned earlier. It was in Cork in March. We had the workshop with the cancer charities. We also discussed our governance and management model back at a meeting. And then we also had our website, which was launched there. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but it's definitely worth a look. Again, we would have I prepared the content for that. And I suppose what I'm trying to do also through my work is, I suppose it's a bit like how we're getting, in a similar vein, to getting patients involved, because if you have patients involved, you get better clinical care and a better understanding of the research. Maybe my perspective on things coming from, let's say, more of a social scientist, information scientist, I'm trying to help to get the message across to a broader audience. So we're dealing with many stakeholders from industry, patients, government departments, obviously the academic institutions, and the hospitals, and I suppose that's what I'm contributing in that way. And just finally to say, the funding is also covering training next month, which I'm doing in Brussels, about the management and coordination of EC funded projects. So it's the methodology, PM square methodology, that's used in the European Commission. So that's all of what I'd like to say today, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Rosemarie. And given the 5 minute slots, we think we'll take questions at the end. Again, I'm not going to introduce Liam. He's already been introduced. I'll just let him get started.
Okay, thanks very much, Siobhan. And again, I'd like to pay tribute to Rosemarie. She's done a huge amount of work, and again, she didn't come from a kind of, I suppose, scientific background in the sense of, biomedical research background, but she's learned a lot, I think, and had to put up with me over the last 18 months, which can be a challenge, I know. And but again, it's important, I think, that we have people from different perspectives, because sometimes we get lost in. I get lost in detail, and it's sometimes important to step back. And again, it was great to have Rosemarie's input. And Rosemarie pretty much wrote the next grant, which again I kind of figureheaded myself and Mark, but obviously it was key representatives from the different institutions. And again, this was funding under the North-South Research Programme. So I like names which do, it's like the Ron Seal version of research programs. It does exactly what it says on the tin. So it's called AICRI Start. It's the start of AICRI. Okay, so it's like a foundation stone. It's a building block. It's not going to solve all of our all issues relating to cancer research, but it provides an exemplar of how 10 different institutions can work together, provide an attractive training environment for PhD students and postdocs. And then that serves as a model that we can amplify, we can grow it out and expand that model. So again, I'd like to pay tribute to the AICRI steering committee, because we essentially decided, okay, there was this call, the North-South research call was coming down the track. Can we actually stand back and kind of plan for that, plan for the process? So we said, okay, look, we'll put in one coordinated strand 3 proposal under what's called the Partnerships of Scale. It's more of a strategic proposal. It's probably less about the kind of scientific detail, more about the strategy. And then where individuals had specific research topics they want to amplify, they would go for Strand 2 or Strand 1 programs. And we have 2 very nice examples of Strand 2 programs which were funded. Lorraine Professor Lorraine O'Driscoll from Trinity College Dublin, and Professor Aedin Culhane from Limerick. So again, with AICRI Start, we had the 10 institutions represented. We had kind of investigators which were representing their institution, acting as kind of key contact points. We didn't really overly define the research projects when we were putting it in. It was more where we're targeting the areas of precision cancer medicine. So ultimately, I suppose the idea is we were very happy when the results came out that, again, this was selected as one of the top funded programs. There was only 2 programs which were awarded under the Strand 3 mechanism, and it scored very, very well across the board. So what's the kind of, so what are we doing with an AICRI Start? Well, fundamentally, as I said, we're funding 10 PhD students and 10 postdocs across the 10 institutions. So in a sense, it's spreading the love somewhat across different institutions, but it's setting in stone, I guess, the concept of interinstitutional partnership. We already have interinstitutional partnership, but not at the scale of 10 institutions. And I suppose for me, the key idea is provide the model of how we train individuals. So a lot of focus will be on aiding and helping those PhD students and postdocs to become the future leaders. So we have a lot of ancillary funding for training opportunities for individuals. So for example, training in terms of PPIE, entrepreneurship training, so just additional resources that those students and postdocs can draw upon. We recruited, we put out a kind of loose call for projects amongst the institutions. We didn't do a very, very big call for projects. It was kind of more focused call. And 10 projects were selected for funding, and people are being actively recruited. I think some of those PhD students are already in place. The 10 postdocs, we haven't defined exactly the research projects within those areas, but probably, what we're hoping to do is use what we've done previously in terms of the research workshops to inform areas of interest. So for example, we have the areas of immuno-oncology, microbiome, functional cancer genomics, again, and we also potentially want to encourage partnership with the other funded programs. in the area of liquid biopsies or digital health. So we'll hopefully over the next couple of months define what those projects are. And what we're hoping to do is, instead of having individual projects like postdocs working on one individual project, we're hoping to have mini teams of postdocs working together, 3 or 4 postdocs working on a common project. That's the aspiration, at least. So I won't go into detail, but we've essentially, we had a fairly fast-paced start. We started on the 1st of September. I'm not exactly sure if all the students have been recruited or they're close to being recruited. At least the projects have been selected, and again, we're hoping to put in place the postdoctoral projects hopefully by the end of the year. Those postdocs are essentially running over a 2-year time frame, whereas the PhD students are 4 years. I won't go into detail, but these are just the list of the projects which are selected, and again, covering a variety of different cancer types, looking at various different kind of areas of interest. Again, for example, some covering the area of the immuno-oncology, diagnostics, therapeutics. Again, some more clinically oriented, some more in the kind of non-clinical space. So again, we have a nice spectrum of projects covering a variety of different areas. So as I mentioned, and again, I suppose I had the experience when I was running Breast Predict. We had 13 PhD students, and I can't remember 12 or 13 postdocs. And again, what was amazing was to see them develop over time. See them kind of mature into these amazing researchers, which have gone on to fantastic things. And I suppose I was really kind of struck by that can we kind of replicate that model and kind of mainstream it now across the system. So we have a couple of symposia organised or planned, and again, it's important that we kind of geographically distribute that. It's not always in Dublin. We're here today in Dublin, but cancer research occurs across the island, and we want to rotate that. So we will provide additional training in terms of entrepreneurship and key skills development. And again, one thing that I'm particularly keen on is, I suppose, if people have ideas on the ground, if it comes from the PhD students and postdocs, can we actually give funding to those PhD students and postdocs? Because that actually is what we're trying to do. We're trying to train them into becoming independent thinkers, but nourish that by giving them funding to push forward their ideas. And we prototyped that within Breast Predict on a couple of occasions quite successfully. So how does the project contribute to AICRI? Again, it provides a kind of template that we hope to expand more globally, get additional funding to scale it up, but also potentially if people have their own PhD training programs in their institutions, they could interdigitate with that. We also are working on, we've had just one chat between the leads of the 3 HEA-funded large-scale programs to try to look at kind of ways that we can work together, maybe at a kind of programmatic level, and then also maybe at a scientific level, because I think if we can actually connect those 3 big programs, there's a big opportunity of kind of providing a demonstrator for the AICRI concept. And ultimately, I suppose we're providing this kind of network network of excellence in cancer research. It does address theme 1 of discovery. Most of the projects are probably more on the discovery end of the system, so it's kind of addressing some aspect of that, and hopefully provides a confidence in terms of our research mission. So that's the kind of thumbnail sketch from AICRI Start.
Thanks, Liam. Is this microphone working? Yeah? Great, thanks a lot. So my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Aedin Culhane. Aedin is a Professor of Biomedical Sciences in the University of Limerick, specialising in cancer genomics. She is a computational oncologist with expertise in multi-omics data integration, statistical genomics, clinical bioinformatics, and genomics in oncology. She has 20 years' experience in cancer genomics, including experience in the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Harvard and Boston. She is a member of the Human Cell Atlas Project and a leader in the bioconductor community, a global open source, open development software for genomics, and she's an advocate for open source science. Thanks, Aedin.
Thanks, Micheál. Thank you, and thanks for the invite to present our project. And I think thank you to AICRI, to Liam, and to everybody. I think this is so important that we all work together. And so Mark and myself were funded with the eHealth Hub under the Emerging Hub of Excellence, which was a strand 2 under the HEA framework.
These are the €4 million grants. So these are substantial grants that will hopefully provide a platform that we can establish what I hope will open new avenues for research on the island of Ireland. So the background to this is I work in informatics, clinical informatics, genomics informatics. Basically, I work in data science. I've worked in data science departments for the past 15 years. So medicine has changed dramatically, and I would say even more so over the past 5 years than over the past 10 years. And this has been precipitated by standards in how we can share data, global standards that have been agreed between the European medicines agencies, between the FDA and the US. And within the US, there is now, since the Cures Act was passed, patients have the right to their own data. I literally had a phone app in the US, and I could look up every single part of my record. And if I chose to go to a different doctor, I would just give them the phone app and it would connect to transfer it. When I came to Ireland and I went to my doctor and I said, here's my phone app with my MyChart record, they said, can you print it off and we'll put it in the record? Or maybe send us a PDF and we can attach it. And I went, we need to improve this, because this does not provide a basis for doing informatics and learning from the data. And so we need to develop and implement genomic-based clinical informatics. And we need to have the patient history, their clinical data, the genetic and genomic assays. We need to be able to say, right, if we look at all BRCA1 positive breast cancer patients on the island of Ireland that were given immunotherapy, what other mutations did they have that predicted their outcome? We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to say, what are the patients in the biobanks that match this criteria? We need then be able to say, let's actually do further deep sequencing on their tumours so we can actually advance the research, and also so we can participate in more clinical trials faster and more rapid. There's no point in waiting for a year to do phase 1 trials. So we need to enable frameworks so we can actually facilitate data sharing. These need to be all Ireland data sharing. But once we have data sharing in place, that will provide us real-time access into the data, which, just like COVID, will allow us to do data-driven, evidence-based policy decisions. We can do meta-analysis and identify disparities or areas that need more investment. For a place like Ireland, it's critical that we have studies with sample size that are sufficient to give us statistical power. Single institute studies frequently don't have sufficiently large numbers of patients to actually give you a statistically robust conclusion. And most importantly of all for Ireland is to be able to leverage European and global data. We need to be able to say, for this one rare condition in Ireland, have we seen this within the EU? Have we seen this within the US? Can we leverage what patients did there and bring that here? So there are frameworks. There's GDPR compliant frameworks, such as the Odyssey network, which are being used at the moment in other European countries. When I arrived here, I asked who's doing this research. I just arrived, I'm here a year now, from Boston, and I didn't identify anybody that was doing this work. And I said, right, we need to do this. And I started talking to Mark, and Mark said, let's just put in for this HEA grant. And I literally was in the country 3 weeks, and we wrote this grant in 3 weeks. But it's really important that we have this infrastructure and the data scientists and the computational scientists and the cloud engineers who can do this work. Because today, we know that there's at least 1 billion patient records that have been mapped to these standard common data models, such as OMAP. In fact, I just spotted today that the IQVIA website says that there's 2 billion patients, so they know more than I do. But there's these frameworks that we can leverage. So what we're bringing together in the Health Hub will harness data expertise on the island of Ireland. So within UL, I've worked on Odyssey projects. We published a few during COVID. The biggest study we had 1 million patients from multiple different countries.
We're a leader in generation of open source software and genomics within the Bioconductor project. There's about 1 million downloads of that annually. And we're experienced in open source software generation, and within Limerick we're also establishing the Lero open source software project to actually leverage that. Northern Ireland is the most advanced electronic healthcare system in Ireland, and also we can leverage their experience in setting up the trusted research environment that they have. And also Mark has participated in global COVID and cancer studies, which really have gained international recognition. He's been there, he knows how it should work and how maybe it doesn't quite work at the moment in the Republic. So we're going to leverage the expertise of Queen's and UL together, leverage off open source software that will benefit everybody and will be available to everybody, such as Odyssey and Bioconductor, to build a strong foundation for digital health research in cancer on the island of Ireland. And as I said, this will be led by Mark and myself, and I'm realising I'm repeating myself on this. The collaboration that we have brought together brings 7 universities and multiple hospitals, and we had about 30 clinicians sign up to this. And so we have a lot of excitement within both the clinical and the basic research community to engage in this project. Clinicians know how important it is to share data and to be able to access their own data in their own hospital as well. And so we have, where are we at the moment? To date, we've signed a memorandum between the universities that was required to be able to get funding. We've started on the data protection and ethics procedures, which are rather cumbersome, but we're getting there. And I wanted to announce, I just saw that there's going to be a data protection workshop for researchers, which is going to be really important, in the Matter on the 20th of October. If people want to sign up to that, and if they don't know about it, give me an email and I can forward it on to you. And we've had initial meetings with Odyssey and Aedin training networks, and we're going to leverage everything that's available within the EU where possible and bring that and give that to our students here. And we've also, UL is also going to be a partner in the Health Research Board Federated Genomics onboarding program as well, where we're going to be implementing some of the cloud technology that enables the federated connection to the EU networks. I should mention what federated technology means, because I know that sort of like, it sounds kind of maybe a little bit like, what is that? The idea behind this is that every single hospital retains their own data. So we're not asking the hospitals to give away data that they think is very sensitive. What happens is the data stays within the data controller within the local site. We just ask them to create a second copy of that data, and we will actually create the scripts to take that data and actually create it into a format where all of the fields in that database and in all of the databases, the genomics, the pathology, and the health records, are actually mapped with standard format. And that means we can write scripts where we send a query to each of those different sites if they give us permission to query. And from that we can extract back just the results. So not necessarily all the patient information, just the overall summarized, the aggregated results. So data protection is ensured, but it allows us to find out what is available in the other records. Okay, so where we're going with this, next thing I'm doing is I'm actually going over to Washington to the Odyssey conference in October. We're working on data protection and ethics. We're working on hiring, we've got 10 PhD students between Queen's and UL that we're going to hire, 4 postdoctoral fellows, and the 7 research assistants will actually work with clinicians in the clinics and actually work, be hands-on on the data. The projects that we have that we described in the grant, and of course we're working with our collaborators to refine those where possible, will include looking at cohorts of breast cancer, see if we can enroll them within the Optima study. We're talking to the folks within Optima and Darwin to see whether we can engage in some of these big European studies. It was looking at the blood cancer network cancers, and seeing how we can basically take that data and maybe make it available within the Harmony study, again, another large European study. So how can we participate more fully in these EU studies? There's also a lot of informatics that we were talking about developing, and then looking exactly at COVID and cancer, and particularly cancer care and COVID, survivorship with respect to COVID and cancer, and disparities with COVID and cancer. We know that COVID didn't hit every community equally. Were certain communities more affected than others, and how that impacts cancer care. So with that, I just want to say we've created an email account. We haven't got our website up. Email ehealth@ul.ie or just my email address, and I'd love to talk to you more about our project. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Aedin. Again, questions at the end. So, final speaker for this session is Professor Lorraine O'Driscoll. Lorraine is Professor of Pharmacology and Biomedicine in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences in Trinity. She is a research lead in the Trinity St James's Cancer Institute, a principal investigator and director of a 3.9 million Horizon Europe training programme, which seeks to train 15 PhD students involving 5 academic institutions and 7 industry partners. She's also one of 12 recipients across all disciplines of a €1 million grant from the Irish Research Council Advanced Laureate Award. Professor O'Driscoll is a member also of the Royal Irish Academy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Good morning, everyone. Yes, so over the next few minutes, I'd like to tell you about the All-Ireland Cancer Liquid Biopsies Consortium that we abbreviate as CLUB. It's one of the Hub of Excellence, the same as Aedin's. So the background to this, the scientific background, is that everyone here knows that tissue biopsies from tumours are the norm for cancer diagnosis, for selecting the right treatment for patients, etc. They're extremely important, they help to save lives, but like everything, they have their limitations. We know that tumours also release a lot of entities into the bloodstream. These include cells that we call circulating tumour cells, tumour DNA, and little packages of information called extracellular vesicles. So in a very simplistic form, the scientific question that we're asking here is, can we use a combination of this information that's released to better help to diagnose cancers, to help to predict the right treatments for patients, to identify if the tumours become resistant or remain insensitive, should the patient be offered a different treatment, and to maybe alert if disease is reoccurring. So we submitted an application to the Strand 2. There were 167 applications, 5 were funded, so a 2.9% success rate. So we were very delighted to be awarded 4 million for this consortium. So what is CLUB about? CLUB is about making the absolute best possible use of every drop of blood that a patient donates to our research and the associated tissue biopsy. Over the last decade and more, my research group has developed a lot of expertise in these little extracellular vesicles that I mentioned, typically funded by European funding, but also from some national funding. Some of my colleagues have focused more so on the circulating tumour cells. Others up in Belfast, my counterpart Paul Mullen and Niamh Buckley on this free DNA. But for the most part, because of specimen availability, because of funding, each of us have been focusing on any one of these entities. So what CLUB allows us to do, this funding allows us to do, is to study all of these entities in the same specimens to get the maximum information from this. And obviously this, associating it with the patient's information, will generate a large amount of data that we will then analyse to identify the best possible biomarkers for diagnosis, predicting response to treatment, etc. I'm very grateful to the various stakeholders that we engaged from the very beginning of the concept and all the way through. And we are partners in our application, our Trinity St James's Cancer Institute biobanks, and also the Northern Ireland Biobank and associated databases. And we will continue to add to these biobanks and databases over the course of CLUB not just for the research here, but also to ensure that we can sustain Club beyond the 4 years that it's funded. And the 15 researchers that are funded in Club by HEA are project manager, researchers, nurses and a technician. So the progress to date since the announcement of Club and the other successes have been keeping in contact with our stakeholders, updating them, the industry advisory boards, patient representative groups. The partnership agreement is in place as with the others. Our kick-off meeting has occurred and our 15 posts are advertised and will all be in place by the 1st of January. We were given a nice template to keep to, so the key future activities, some are similar, some are different than what Liam outlined for Risteárd. So we have a number of workshops that will be funded, training events for patient representative groups. This was something that I felt was very important because when we talked to our Trinity St James's Cancer Institute patients, they felt that they would like more training as well and more support. Also symposia we will have at the 3 different sites and some seed funding for our Bright Sparks to come up with new ideas. And the final slide in the template was how can we all work together better and work together better through AICRI. So I think from the 3 projects that have been outlined, there's a lot of synergism, non-overlapping but complementary skill sets, training opportunities, symposia, and I don't mean just for the people who are directly funded because this is more than just the sum of the 3 parts. I think there's opportunities, as Liam mentioned, to strategically use some of the opportunities that are funded to make human links between the projects, but I think overall increasing the critical mass of researchers that are funded on the island of Ireland will further increase our abilities to secure more non-exchequer funding for cancer research on our shared island. And one last thing I would like to say that's a little bit off script is I'd like to acknowledge John Crown because I think one of the first national virtual funded cancer centres was TCI, Molecular Therapeutics for Cancer Ireland, which was an SFI SRC. And I think that was led by John and supported by Karen. And it showed that there was not just a willingness, but a want for clinical, scientific researchers and patients to work together for the greater good. So thank you all very much.
May I just invite all the speakers from our session up to the table so we can take some questions.
I completely agree with that, and I think the HEA would always be open to synergisms and making the best use and bringing in more people who, as I said, people who aren't directly funded, because I know sometimes people can feel I'm not funded by that, so do I really belong? But I think this is about cancer research, and every cancer researcher should feel that they belong.
That's ideally, and again, it could be a lot around the HA, but not exclusively HA-funded programs, because I think it's a starting point. I think we probably need to kind of get our own kind of house in order, get our own programs kind of off the shelf, and then started, but with a view towards kind of coordinated approaches, so we can kind of maximise the resources that are there, but also for the people in the teams, it's useful for them to see other activities as well. So from a general training point of view, it's very good. But also maybe the project management kind of component as well, because a lot of the workings of these bigger programs happens at a layer of the project management layer.
Yeah, completely agree. Like sharing resources maximises our budget and brings more people and more connectivity together. And we're more than the sum of the parts. I also think we can leverage this when seeking EU and international funding, because we can say that 12 million has been invested in this collectively, and I think that makes a strong statement for investment, national investment in cancer research in Ireland, and I think that gives that extra bit of credibility internationally when we're seeking funding as well.
I'm just going to make a brief comment about, again, the European framework. Again, as many of my colleagues would have familiarity in previous framework programs, but the game has completely changed. It's a completely different ballgame in terms of participation at a European level. And I think we need to work together to actually improve our chances of success under those programs, because it's about critical mass, and it's about, like, to be honest, Ireland is often not at the table for a lot of the conversations. It's almost like, you know, maybe there's a couple of exceptions to that, but generally you're too late to the party. So there's a couple of programs I want to emphasise. So there is a program called uncan.eu, which is actually funded.
Feel allergic to you, Liam.
It's only Liam,
Yeah. The Daleks are coming. Uncan.eu, because again, a lot of the focus of the funding in the European system is very much towards which is good, towards the patient end and the kind of translational end, but it's again important to fund discovery, you know what I mean? So one critical area is the Uncan.eu program. We put out a call for people who are interested in volunteering as members of expert working group, because they're going to define essentially the research agenda in those areas, the topics which are going to be funded. So ostensibly I'm kind of the Irish rep, one of the Irish reps involved in one of this coordination support actions, one of the first cancer mission programs funded. And there's a couple of other kind of similar networks that might be funded. For example, there's hopefully going to be a national cancer mission hub that hopefully between the National Cancer Control Programme and AICRI and some guys will provide a forum for interaction. And I'm sure there's also efforts in the comprehensive cancer infrastructures area. So ultimately, whatever people get in terms of funding, it's critically important that we synergise resources and help each other out in terms of participation. And we need to actually bypass our institutional perspectives and go beyond that, because ultimately the game is helping cancer research across the board. So that would be the kind of my argument. So sorry, I'll get off the pillar now.
Next, so
will we go?
I'm just going to ask: is there any more questions before I close this session? Okay. Thank you very much.
So actually, myself and Mark are going to do a double team, and we normally the problem is I dress in a blue suit, and the problem is when the two of us have a blue suit, because Mark always wears his blue suit. It might look a bit weird today to have the two of us in the blue suit. Yeah. Okay, so I have a couple of slides, but I think what we can use this as a kind of like.
I think I've put on the wrong one there, is it?
Yeah.
Well,
it's cool news, yeah. Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a couple of context slides, just going to get to maybe some topics that we can discuss, but I'm going to throw it out for people. You know, we've heard a lot today in terms of the process we've used. Again, and I'll come back again. Lorraine kind of bet me to it. I was going to acknowledge John for his leadership, Professor John Crown for his leadership in terms of, you know, obviously with the other Johns setting up AICRI originally, but then kind of looking at trying to get funding for the translational cancer research space, this first big program which brought people together in terms of molecular therapeutics for cancer Ireland. It was a great experience because we hadn't worked together. I'd come back from France. A few people hadn't worked together, and it really provided a template for new interactions. That led indirectly to Breast Predict that John Crown and I led. Again, it had a start, middle and end. But now we're trying to kind of go forward and actually use what we've learned in those programs to bring them into kind of a broader perspective. So back to, I suppose, one of the things that we're trying to do from AICRI is, again, build this overarching framework for cancer research across the island of Ireland, again, fulfilling, at least in the National Cancer Control Programme strategy, that specific line. Can we actually address that? So again, as part of that, we had our first in-person meeting of our steering committee in the 1st of September, in UCD, just trashing out some ideas. And again, we don't have all of the answers. The answers lie in this room and elsewhere, you know what I mean? So it's the community that are going to define the answers to these questions. But I think it's important to kind of, I suppose what we wanted to do is we had done a lot for 18 months where, we started with a concept, but really the tangible nature of that concept was only starting to be executed with these research programs which are funded. And I suppose one of the things that we were key was, like, can we have a common message? So again, the simple vision that we have is that, can we provide an overarching framework for cancer research across the island from discovery to implementation? We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, there's already good systems in place, so we're trying to just provide that general kind of overview, connect the dots a bit more. And really what we're talking about is harnessing the combined strengths of the cancer researchers and other stakeholders, and to help really look at, maybe bottlenecks in the system. Can we address certain bottlenecks? We've addressed maybe biobanking as a potential challenge in the Republic of Ireland. Can we address that? So can we work together to overcome these challenges? And so from that day, I suppose what we did is kind of come up with some potential opportunities and challenges. So, we're not saying that, AICRI is a kind of collective approach. It doesn't have for example, it doesn't have a formal legal basis. It's a community of researchers and other stakeholders coming together. We may decide to more formalise that later on. But ultimately, what it really is a bottom-up approach where we have other key stakeholders involved. And what we hope to have, we're not saying it's the only voice, but we hope to have some kind of collective voice, because a collective voice carries more power, particularly if you're trying to represent what we're doing at a governmental level and at a European level. As Mark indicated, we're trying to bring people together, provide opportunities for people together, provide new cultural kind of opportunities. Look at best-in-class models. For example, if you look at what Mark has been and his colleagues have been doing in the data science space, can we leverage that in the Republic of Ireland? Look at things, best practice in other jurisdictions, and take the parts that we want. And particularly a focus on training, provide an attractive training ground for individuals. Some of the challenges is, which have been commented on, and it's a particular challenge, is this kind of maybe more alignment between research and cancer care. We can come up with new interventions, but how do we transition those, and how do we ensure that? I think we need to fund demonstrators. I think we need significant funding for demonstrator projects which transition ideas. I was always very struck from, and I can't remember, I should have known, was it in colon or the breast cancer space, but Andrew Green, a very prominent geneticist, when they were trying to mainstream genetic testing in Ireland, it was a HRB project that they had to get to actually prototype the utility of that before it should have been funded by the kind of cancer care system. So that demonstrator aspect is critically important. I think attracting and retaining research students, I commented on this, like Aedin, you're going to have a tough job recruiting people in the AI and the data analytics space. Hopefully, you have those networks, because there's so many other opportunities for these people to go to. So we really have to make it attractive for people to work there. We have some infrastructure gaps, but we've actually been able to fill some of those. For example, Walter College in the audience got very significant funding for upgrading proteomics and metabolomics facilities, which at a nationwide level. We also got funding from SFI for a national tissue profiling distributed facility between UCD, College of Surgeons, UL and TU Dublin. But importantly, this is a national facility. Anybody can use it. It's the same cost for any researcher, and anybody can access it on an equitable basis. I think back to the other John's point, which was really what's holding us back. Well, sustained long-term funding, guaranteed. Like we need to know what's happening down the track, and I think that's part of what AICRI can hopefully do. And we also need to have this critical mass. So I'm a simple person, so I like kind of simple ideas. I like kind of few ideas, and let's work on them. So first of all, I think we just need a plan of action. What's our plan over the next 5 years? We've done reasonably well, I think, over the last 18 months, but we need to step to the next level. And certainly I would hope to have your support for that. We want to build on areas of specific critical mass, really to assemble competitive bids for, particularly I think we need this centralised, I think we need a larger entity funded. We have these very good projects, large scale projects, but it's insufficient, I think, to retain the cohesive nature of what AICRI is. I think we do need a big programme funded of the scale of something like Insight or Curum, these large scale programmes which are have a distributed structure, leadership structure, but a cohesive message in terms of their programme. But for us to actually be able to participate in this, we need to actually work as a community to actually lobby for this, because we need support at a political level to actually make sure that there is funding ring-fenced for at least health, but also particularly cancer. So we need to work together for that. I think it's critically important that we work very closely with the National Cancer Control Programme and other entities to provide a common voice. And again, as I mentioned, the training opportunities. And also, I think, obviously there are other groups doing this, but I think AICRI can join in this effort in communication about the importance of cancer research. So I'm going to stop for a minute here and then I'll talk about stakeholder engagement, but open up the floor to questions for this first part about the future. Any comments about the way we've done it or what we should be doing going forward? Open it out. Maeve.
Thanks, Rosemarie, and congratulations everyone today on, fantastic programmes of research that have been shown. I guess our vulnerability in AICRI is our ability to translate all of this to the patient, right? That's going to be our biggest challenge, I think. And that's going to need significant funding and a coherent joint effort across every cancer centre in Ireland with NCCP backing to make sure that that happens. The vision is very clearly and appropriately focused on the patient, but our ability to translate what we have in the lab into actual clinical practice is at the moment quite limited. It's a major issue that I think that we have to address up front. The Cancer Institute model that we have in Trinity and James's, RCSI in Beaumont, soon to be hopefully many other centres in the country, that's a really good way to translate lab-based findings into clinical research. And I'd welcome Evelyn's thoughts as well on the clinical trial development, especially early drug development. So I think we just have to address that up front, that we really need to make sure that all this reaches the patient. And that's going to be complex, and I think it's going to be one of the biggest challenges that AICRI faces over the next 5 years, hopefully decade, and much, much longer going forward. And then just one, question, Mark, for you. Again, this is an all-island approach, but it's actually very hard for patients in Northern Ireland in particular to access any services for cancer treatment or clinical trials in the Republic, and actually vice versa, and also travelling between Ireland perhaps and the UK more broadly, that east-west. So how do you think we can address that better, or how do you think that AICRI could contribute perhaps to that?
Yeah, while Mark is waiting for the call, I think that's where the Peace Plus programme comes in, because the Peace Plus calls out specifically cross-border interventional trials. Now I'm talking about trials as opposed to broader aspects of care. I think, again, this is a research institute, a certain amount of what we can do, and then there's hopefully transition this into care. But there are specific mechanisms, and I think we should put programmes and demonstrators together to exemplify that for cross-border interventional trials. There is funding available for that. Ideas need to go in, people need to write the projects and actually get the funding to do it.
Thanks very much, Maeve. And to your first point, absolutely agree with you. I sometimes classify this as we're very good at breakthrough, but not very good at follow-through. And I think implementation, and actually implementation science, needs to be a part of our programme going forward, because a lot of the times we bring something to a certain stage, but it doesn't actually get to that final. And that's not just in Ireland, that's a European problem, to be perfectly honest. And it'll be interesting to see how the European funding sort of reflects that going forward. And in relation to your particular question in relation to access, I think incredibly important. One of the things we've been struggling with, we have a Northern Ireland cancer strategy, but it isn't funded yet. And that is incredibly frustrating, particularly as we actually did it the very right way, had a co-chair who was a patient, had each of the committees who were co-chairs or patients, produce something that I think is a really good model for how we should deliver care in Northern Ireland, and then our politicians let us down, to be perfectly frank. And so that's one of the things we have to do. We've talked about some areas where Northern Ireland maybe is ahead, but there are also areas where we're behind, and I think that's why working on an all-island basis makes a lot of sense, because I think we can learn from each other, share best practice, share ways in which we've achieved it. I'd be really interested in Evelyn's comments specifically in relation to all-island clinical trials, because we've talked about this a lot, and because I think there are opportunities there that we need to look at, but we need to cut down the red tape. And I've been arguing about this for the last 2 years. We've been able to do it for COVID in the UK,
We've been able to essentially put aside a lot of the challenges that we face in terms of access to data. Why can't cancer be the same as COVID? It should be the same as COVID. It kills more people than COVID does. It causes more problems than COVID does. So why the hell aren't we doing something about it? And that's what we've been certainly very much arguing at the UK level in relation to that, and hopefully starting to get some response to that. So I think there's a political aspect to it, but the other thing is, if we can show that we can deliver, I think we're going to be a lot more stronger in terms of making that political argument as well. But I absolutely agree with you that it's not an easy journey, but hopefully working together will make it more possible.
Maeve, you made a great point there about, the historic pairwise alignment of hospital and specific university, Trinity, St. James's, UCD, St. Vincent's. In an island the size of Ireland, aligning yourself just to one hospital or just to one university may well be limiting. And this, I think, will be a fundamental challenge within AICRI and an opportunity to actually say, well, maybe, St. James's should also work with UCD, or UCD should also work with the Mater, or but you know what I mean. It's like how to actually break down those because a lot of the memorandums of understanding and the legal frameworks that are in place are kind of actually restricting when we consider all Ireland cancer research.
From what Maeve said, I think the most important thing from cancer trials point of view is the Northern Ireland Protocol left out the ability for patients to travel across border.
Yeah.
So that's very specifically left out of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So patients in Donegal or Monaghan who want to travel north, or northern patients who want to travel south and access a trial, pretty much have to do it on their own pocket. And that's not good enough when we're talking about an all-Ireland collaboration. The other question Maeve raised was around early trials, early phase trials, and we need huge investment to do that. And everybody's been saying already, we're working together on the island, which to be honest is the model in cancer trials. We all sit together at the SSGs and work together on clinical trials. So there is an interest amongst the community to work together. Going back to what Aedin said, some of the structures aren't helping us with that.
Well, for example, for phase 1 clinical trials, we do have some experience in Belfast in relation to that, but looking at a distributed model that allows us to do phase 1 clinical trials on the island of Ireland, investigator-led trials, would be really powerful, and that's another example of a way in which we could work together to achieve that, because I think it's badly needed. We don't really have that option, particularly on an all-island basis. As I said, we have some expertise in that in the north, but there's still a way to go.
Thanks very much. It was just to pick up on the points there, in case there's any misunderstanding. Trinity working with St. James's or Beaumont working with RCSI, that's to do with OECI accreditation, and that does raise the bar for everybody and for patients. But it's not as if they're only going to work with those, because we're researchers and we want to work with everybody on the island of Ireland. But it is a structure that maybe can be rolled out, and the more groups that go for OECI accreditation and maybe we can help them, the better.
I think that's an important, and I think again we used to have a diagram trying to fit in, and I think it's those local kind of, I suppose in a sense, focus on quality metrics and alignment between the academic institution and the natural clinical partner is good, because as you said, it raises the kind of credit, the quality bar, and it kind of shows that, and it raises the importance of research, I guess, in the institution, and the kind of particularly in the clinical side. But I think we're a small country, so we have to, in a sense, that's where I kind of feel that AICRI kind of provides that opportunity for networking as well. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, so we're trying to create a structure that makes sense. You've got your local kind of improvements and kind of going for accreditation. We're quite far behind, like we're a couple of years behind in our institution. It was quite frustrating. But if you look at, for example, at a European level, you've got even beyond OECI, you've got Cancer Core Europe. Do you know what I mean? And you look at what they did, is they set up a structural entity between 6 big main institutions. So and they had a specific legal framework to do that. So I do think that there's AICRI kind of, at the moment, provides an opportunity for those network connections. It's not the only way, but I think if we can focus on that, the added value of AICRI on top of what's already happening, that would be very good. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit and just talk about stakeholder engagement. So again, this is kind of, we're entering the final phase, but again, as I mentioned, it was kind of key for us that we have this engagement at multiple different levels with multiple different stakeholders, and we still need to keep doing that. So for example, there's a piece around industry that we need to actually handle and address that, because there's a kind of, as part of the economic argument for AICRI, we need to kind of capture what is kind of the narrative around the potential economic impact if we provide support for AICRI and other kind of initiatives. So fundamentally, the way that we're approaching this, at least, is that it's a bottom-up and inclusive initiative, and we welcome participation from all who are interested in supporting the vision. And we've had involvement from multiple different groups, and we've gotten good buy-in. Trying to translate some of that energy again into something tangible, we have to be careful as well. There's only certain things we can do within the resources that we have, but it's building, first of all, by engaging with the community, we get an idea of what's important, we get the picture, and then we as a community can try to address those issues. So again, we talked about things like challenges between a sufficient time for clinicians to have for research, the interaction between non-clinical and clinical researchers, funding demonstrator projects. We have certain things that we've identified. We should be translating that as a voice to the funders and our government agencies, that these are really important things from the community. So that's where AICRI can help. And it's not just AICRI, we've obviously got the Irish Association of Cancer Research and other organisations, so we're not trying to reinvent those organisations. But it's a community of people who are actually, it's up to us to define what we want to do over the next number of years. So just to finish off, so going forward, I think, in summary, I think we've done well in terms of that engagement piece, but the job is not done. And if the people had any kind of suggestions or comments, please feed that to us. We're always interested in kind of looking at different models. I just want to kind of maybe open it up a bit now to that side of the house about, how do we do this more effectively? What would you like to see? And again, I'm not going to promise to be able to deliver on it, but I'd like to hear your ideas. Because ultimately it's up to us to kind of craft it.
Can I just come in on the industry thing? And this is the reason why in-person meetings make more sense than hybrid meetings. I know we had to have hybrid meetings, etc. But I had a conversation with Gráinne Lennon, who's over there, during the coffee break. And one of the things we were talking about was exactly that, in terms of looking at all-island approaches to industrial engagement. I don't know that, Gráinne, you want to say something, because we've already decided to do something together on that, just based on that conversation. And the second person I'd like to bring in is Chris Scott, who has a lot of experience in this area from his work on the Future Medicines Initiative in Northern Ireland, and would be interested in his comments on that.
Thanks, Mark. Gráinne Lennon, Intertrade Ireland. Yes, we have a programme to support North-South collaboration on I suppose clusters involving industry, research, and the public or consumer, in this case the patient. So it's something we would be keen to explore in terms of following on the step from the research to commercialisation through to industry collaboration. So as you said, Mark, we'll catch up afterwards and see where we can take this from.
Super, thanks, Gráinne. And maybe Chris just to come in as well.
Yes, there's some real excellent opportunities here. There is clear differences in the landscape in life sciences between the north and the south, and I think we can learn from each other. And at Belfast at the moment, we're very much focused on trying to really redefine how we interact with regional industry and collaborate. And it's something that we've been working with our investment partner, Invest Northern Ireland, on. Really working at things collaboratively and trying to create new space where companies, academics and clinicians can come together. And from that, not only will each company then drive their own agendas, but also then the fallout from that will create new companies. So that's something that we have had economically appraised, and there's there's real potential there, and I think there's real synergy then with across the whole island of Ireland to develop that further. And you know, companies want to talk to other universities, and sometimes they just find it hard to make those initial interactions. So something like AICRI then is going to be a perfect front door for that. So thanks, Chris.
Okay, I'm just conscious that we have, that I don't want to kind of interfere, leach too much into the meeting times. Actually, give the last word to Sarah at the back here.
Thanks for a fantastic meeting this morning. It's been great. My name is Sarah McLaughlin, by the way. Just on the final point of on your slide there, the government departments and political leaders, like we've heard a lot this morning, especially from Mark, about the frustrations around political support and getting on board, and you know, not only just in the Republic, but we've got at least 2 departments to deal with there. So that seems like a huge body of work to try and get that support. And I guess just a little bit of your thoughts on how to actually approach that. How is AICR going to approach that? Because it seems like a huge job.
Yeah, well, it is a job in itself. So at the moment, it's kind of done in a non-reimbursed way. We like one of the kind of stepping stones for AICRI, at least. We need a kind of like, you know, we have a initial tier now. It's getting that middle tier to actually, we need a specific person to actually drive that forward. And you know, it does take time and effort. And it was quite interesting. I think it was actually at the Beaumont meeting last week. I can't remember. There was a person from Norway speaking from one of the Norwegian cancer centres, and I think they did a lot of political engagement. And the best thing is, once the relevant minister says, "Oh, this is my idea now," that was the big. Once you implant the idea in the head and it becomes their idea, then you've done the job. So I think that's what we need to. We need to have more interactions. We're doing a certain amount of that. It does take effort, but we've gotten goodwill and participation so far. But we need to kind of convert that, because the problem is, you know, we're just continuous distraction. There's other things come on the scene. So we need to keep at it, but also do it in an organised, collective way. Because I think the challenge is, I think a lot of the government departments are hearing, you know, many different voices in the cancer space and many different requests, and it's getting diluted in terms of the message. So that's a challenge. We're not helping each other out because we're not often coming in on a collective voice. So collective voice, we need a specific person to actually do that specific job with the input of the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had really good engagement at that sort of high level, and just again acknowledge Kieran's work in that in relation to the Office of the Taoiseach, the presenting to the Good Friday Committee of the Good Friday, implementing the Good Friday Agreement. I think the challenge is in that sort of lower level and that civil service level, and I think we still need to do more work in that, both north and south. But we're certainly very committed to that. But I think we probably need that. That's probably where, you know, because that's where the implementation happens.
So we have a travelling roadshow, which normally rotates to different government departments, but we need to go beyond that. So look, I'm going to wind up, and I was going to first of all thank everybody for coming. But I'm going to introduce our next speaker is Professor John Crown. And again, I'd really like to echo what Lorraine said. You know, John has been, you know, has been a vision behind a lot of the concepts even today, because ultimately he spearheaded a lot of the national efforts for integration of both cancer trials research, but also particularly the area that I would be familiar with is in the area of translational cancer research, both within MTCI and Breast Predict, but also this amazing meeting that's going to take place this afternoon in the next couple of days. I had a great fortune, I think, participating in one of the first meetings. So, John, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can tell us all about it. Thanks.
After 2.5 years, we still can't work. I was going to say we still can't work the combination of masks and hearing aids without actually turning them into little slingshots. But anyway, we'll get it sometime. Liam, what the hell? Liam and Mark, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate the invitation to attend today, and I wish you all the very best in this very ambitious and worthy program, which I'm sure will bear great fruit. I was privileged enough to have had the opportunity to come into Ireland at a time when there clearly was a great need for the development of both intramural and national structures for clinical research. And we set about doing that. I remember When I was in New York, I used to go to the ASCO meetings, and it used to always strike me that there were speakers from small European countries, from Denmark, Norway, etc. And with one great exception, when Des Carney gave a great talk on ovarian cancer, there was nearly never any Irish input. And in truth, I was often the only Irish person at the ASCO meeting in those days. So when I came back, priority number one was to try and set up national clinical trials, which we did together with John Armstrong and I originally. John Kennedy very heavily involved soon thereafter in a group called the Irish Cooperative Oncology Research Group. And I must say it was an extraordinary success. We did go from a situation where we had nearly no Irish input in these meetings to a situation where we were making podium presentations, chairing international meetings. I had the great privilege of actually presenting one of the studies to the FDA, which resulted in the part of the license for one of the drugs, which is now widely used in the treatment of breast cancer, the drug being docetaxel. We also had other great metrics. We had there was one very large study that called the Big Study. It was one of the original studies done by the Big Group, led by Martine Picard, on whose committees I served for a number of years. And we had the highest rate of tissue collection. We were very keen on the whole idea of translational research. So of all the centres that were on board this large multi-continental study, Ireland, with its rather, in truth, primitive health system and very underprovided cancer services, still managed to have the highest rate of tissue collection of any centre in the study. So we were very pleased with that, and as Lorraine has kindly and graciously and Liam as well pointed out, we then tried to move this into move the AICRI model into the translational space with something called Molecular Therapeutics for Cancer Ireland, which was funded by SFI for a 5-year period, which I think was very productive, and I think it did start the ball rolling for a collaborative research going forward. A few other little things. I always get slightly amused when I hear about the NCI coming over here to do missionary work with us on clinical trials. The NCI had a national ambition for the United States to put 3% of patients in that country, 3% of breast cancer patients in that country on clinical trials. At the time we were doing 20% in AICRI. We had an extraordinary, very efficient level of accrual to trials at that time. And, you know, what can I say? I think this goes to show that if the will is there and the impediments are removed and the people with, you know, expertise and appropriate skills and qualifications put in the right places, then things can happen. The problem, and I hate to say this, but the problem, everybody suddenly is chattering their teeth. What the hell is he going to say now? Don't worry. The problem basically that is impeding and will impede the clinical side of the research project is the health service. The Irish Public Health Service is a mess. I say that with absolutely no apology to anybody in the room. A system which is making people wait 3, 4, 5, and 6 months to get routine scans done. 7-year waiting lists for some specialist services is not a high quality service. And the fact that, you know, we have an absolutely unprecedented percentage of our oncologists in this country have trained in the absolutely leading cancer centers in the world. I mean, America doesn't have as high a percentage of its oncologists trained in leading American cancer centers as Ireland does. About 90% of ours have trained in Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, Johns Hopkins, National Cancer Institute, and Dana-Farber. There's no place can do that. So you can see there's an extraordinary concentration of talent in this country, and I have to say it's being held back by the health service. So we have a job on our hands. I don't know where to begin with it, because fixing the problems of the cancer service in microcosm without dealing with the problems of the public health service is going to be very difficult. However, I do think, you know, think big. The late Paddy Johnson, who I knew for many years as a student and doctor, and he also was one of the people we invited on board in the early days of AICRI to lead one of the disciplinary groups in AICRI, and you know, his visionary remark about thinking big is absolutely correct. But it requires interpretation. What are the big thoughts you want to have? Do you want to have the biggest bureaucracy with the most number of committees and the, you know, greatest number of, you know, bits of paper being generated, or do you want to cure cancer? And that's the big thought we have to have. It's always been my ambition. My ambition always was to have, I understand my own intellectual and scientific limitations, but my ambition always was to try and leverage whatever I had to play my little role in eliminating the beast of cancer. And that's what we have to do. And that's the big thought that I'd like this new group to have. I got nearly emotional once when I heard Vincent DeVita giving a speech at an NSABP meeting. It was one of the anniversary meetings for the NSABP, who were one of the great pan-United States, and now, because of the involvement of some AICRI centres at the time, international cooperative groups, which led to incredibly important advances in breast cancer, such as the fact that women did not need to lose their breast if they had breast cancer, the fact that drug treatment could help women if they had breast cancer. And they were having a meeting which also had an element of an anniversary, and DeVita gave a talk and he said, you know, it's great to be here, but someday someone is going to come into this room and say, don't choke up, Crown. This is the last NSABP meeting. Why? Because it's gone. We beat it. It's cured. No more breast cancer. Okay? So that's the point. That's what we should aim for as we go forward. Now, any of you, I would hope that you're mostly all staying on for the next 3 days, 2.5 days, for the CCRT-sponsored, Caroline Foundation-sponsored 15th International Symposium on Translational Research in Cancer, founded originally by Dennis Lehman and myself in the year 2001. A symposium, at the time we said we're having a symposium on translational research, people said, does that mean it's going to be in Irish? There was a very limited understanding at the time of what translational research was. And when DCU, a year or two later, approached me and said, we would like to give you a personal share in cancer research, they said, what do you want to be called? And I said, I want to be Professor of Translational Cancer Research. And again, the eyebrows were raising at the time. But this has really been what's happened. And people like John Kennedy and myself, who spent big chunks of our precious youth trying to hammer cancer into submission with large doses of chemotherapy, an undertaking which we found in the end of the 1990s was not exactly going anywhere, realized that the time had come that the long investment in basic cancer research science had actually reached some level of fruition at that stage, and the technology was catching up with the science and was giving us tools which we could actually use to study and to treat cancers in a more rational fashion, which we're now doing. So this meeting really is aimed at that. It's at that translational interface. It will be people from companies and academic institutions presenting things like pipelines, new ideas, new tests, new treatments, and also an element of some of the clinical trials, not the great big mature clinical trials, but in general some of the trials which are giving some of the early signals of activity. So again, I'll finish on that. I think there's always a danger when I stand up to give a speech that it'll look like Father Ted's acceptance speech for the Golden Cleric. Category next.
No, the voters.
Well, yeah, exactly. So thank you all very much. You're all very welcome. I hope you're all registered for the meeting. We're going to have a 2.5-day utter Disneyland festival of cancer research. Tonight at 6 o'clock, we're very privileged to have Dr. Sarah Hurwitz from UCLA, who really has emerged, I would say, as arguably the leading young breast cancer researcher, both clinical and translational in recent years, who's going to host the latest in our CCRT-sponsored series of Dare to Cure meetings. This one is Dare to Cure Metastatic Breast Cancer. It will be open to the public cancer patients, relatives, carers. There's a Zoom link online which you can get for you. Just one little housekeeping message. The meeting will require everybody to wear masks tonight and for the next 2 days of the meetings in the audience. I think we still have a pandemic going on, and having a lot of people in rooms without masks is probably still not the best idea in the world. Look forward to seeing you all. Take care. Thank you, Liam.
Thanks very much, John. They were inspirational words, and look, thanks very much for everybody coming today. So we're going to have kind of networking lunch where hopefully that many of you will stay on for this fantastic workshop or symposium over the next 2.5 days. So again, thanks very much, and hopefully this is the first of many meetings for AICRI, and thanks for your support. Bye.